On a quiet street in a border city between Mexico and the United States, a young woman vanished without a trace, leaving her loved ones in anguish. Her name was Fernanda González Serrano. Her phone went silent. Her husband said she had simply left. The police suggested she had run away, but her family knew that was impossible. Fernanda would never disappear without a word. In Tijuana, silence often means something far darker. Weeks later, emergency services received an anonymous call revealing where she had been buried. And then, one night, under the rain, her sister Erika and their father began to dig in the yard themselves, refusing to wait. A little while late, they unearthed the unthinkable. Fernanda had not lived. She had been buried. Fernanda was born in Tijuana and was the oldest of 3 sisters. She had a particularly close relationship with her sister, Erika Serrano González. She spent her childhood moving between 2 countries, holding a visa that allowed her to regularly attend school in San Diego. At 16, she met Baudilio Juárez, a 29-year-old divorced man with 3 sons. Their relationship immediately changed the course of her young life. Despite the age difference and obvious challenges, Fernanda fell deeply in love. They soon married in San Diego and settled in Tijuana, beginning what appeared to be a hopeful new chapter. According to her family, Fernanda was kind, calm, and emotionally balanced. She valued harmony, especially with her sisters, always encouraged strong family ties. After the wedding, Baudilio suggested that Fernanda stay home while he provided for them financially. He worked in San Diego, where his sons lived, and crossed the border often. Fernanda continued to travel to the United States as well, deeply religious. Baudilio introduced Fernanda to Christianity, a faith she embraced and made part of her daily life. Over time, these changes reflected Baudilio's influence and gradually shaped her worldview. Although their marriage seemed perfect from the outside, troubling issues existed beneath the surface. Erika was the first to learn that Baudilio was abusive. Fernanda confided in her that he repeatedly beat her and used illegal substances. Alarmed, Erika was alarmed and pleaded with Fernanda to leave. However, Fernanda hesitated, hoping her love and patience would be enough to fix the situation. She never reported anything to the authorities. The situation soon deteriorated further. Fernanda would call Erika in desperation, begging her to come and get her because of Baudilio's violent outbursts. Erika often confronted him directly, arguing with him many times. Despite the fear and the warnings from family, Fernanda chose to stay. To outsiders, they looked like an ordinary couple. Neighbors and acquaintances never heard arguments or saw signs of trouble. They spent weekends with Baudilio's sons. In 2012, his eldest, Erika Juárez, began staying with them, sometimes for extended periods. At first, Fernanda and Erika got along well. But as he entered adolescence, he became increasingly rebellious. Fernanda assumed it was a phase he would eventually outgrow. Sadly, things only got worse. In late 2018, 20-year-old Erika moved in with Fernanda and Baudilio permanently. It did not take long before Fernanda realized the problem was far more serious. Erika was not only aggressive, he used illegal substances and carried a weapon. On December 1, Fernanda's 32nd birthday, she confided to Erika that Erika had been living with them for several months. When Erika asked about their finances, Fernanda explained that all the money she had saved for a new house had been spent on Erika's bail and legal problems. The months that followed marked the beginning of a nightmare for Fernanda. Baudilio refused to acknowledge his son's dangerous behavior. On February 3, 2019, the family could no longer reach her. Fernanda was not answering her phone, something completely out of character for her. Attempts to contact Baudilio were also unsuccessful. As night fell, Fernanda's family grew certain something awful had occurred. They reported her disappearance to the police, but the police response shocked them. Officers suggested Fernanda had likely left willingly or run away with someone else. This explanation only increased the family's fear and sense of powerlessness. 2 days later, on February 5, the family learned that Baudilio was in a hospital in San Diego with a gunshot wound to his forearm. According to an employee from the Baja California prosecutor's office who notified local police, Baudilio claimed a man had tried to break into the house and shot him. He said the injury was minor, which was why he went to San Diego for treatment. Erika rushed to the hospital to confront him, desperate to find out what had happened, driven by fear for her sister's safety. At first, Baudilio claimed that $5,000 he had hidden at home had been stolen. Soon after, he changed his story, saying that a much larger amount of dollars was missing. He stated that he had said goodbye to his wife that morning as usual before leaving for work. They briefly discussed their son Aaron, and then Baudilio drove away. Around 7 o'clock a.m., he sent Fernanda a text message saying he had arrived, and then continued with his workday. According to Baudilio, when he returned home that evening, he noticed one of his dogs sitting on the sidewalk. Neighbors told him that the dog had been there since midday. He checked the garage and saw that Fernanda's car was gone, assuming she had gone to the gym. He then saw Aaron and scolded him for taking his vehicle without permission. Before going inside, he stopped at a nearby store. When he returned, he smoked a cigarette, and only then entered the house. He was about to confront his son again when, upon entering the bedroom, he was suddenly faced with an unknown young man pointing a gun at him. He described the intruder as slim, light-skinned, with dark hair. According to Baudilio, the stranger shot him in the right forearm, causing him to fall to the floor and lose consciousness. When he came to, his son was beside him, crying and asking what had happened. Baudilio said he then told Aaron to drive him to San Diego. Investigators immediately found the account suspicious. The house had guard dogs, so a stranger could not have entered Aaron's room unnoticed. These inconsistencies led police to suspect that the events were related to a conflict between Baudilio and Fernanda that had spiraled out of control. One theory was that they had argued Fernanda had been injured during the altercation, which would explain why Baudilio refused to cooperate fully with authorities and appeared to be hiding information. When Erika met with Baudilio, he repeated the same story he had told law enforcement. According to Aaron, they had recently argued because Fernanda believed he was spending too much time gambling. This statement alarmed Erika, who knew exactly what Aaron was involved in. After leaving the hospital, she went straight to the public prosecutor's office to share everything she knew about Aaron's behavior and her fears for Fernanda's safety. Authorities issued a public appeal, asking residents to help in the search. A missing person bulletin was distributed to the media, listing Fernanda's physical characteristics, including a distinctive birthmark on her chest. 2 days later, on February 7, the family discovered that Aaron was still inside the house where Fernanda had lived. They alerted police, who quickly arrived. When officers entered the property, they confirmed that neither Fernanda, her car, nor her personal belongings were present. Aaron was taken to the station for questioning, and Erika accompanied them. Determined not to remain passive, the first surprise came when Aaron gave a version of events that did not match his father's. He claimed that Fernanda and Baudilio had argued that morning, after which she got into her car and drove away. He added that he took his father's vehicle to follow her, but he was unable to catch up, so he went to a friend's house and returned only later. These contradictions only reinforced Erika's suspicions. She urged police to arrest Aaron, but they had no legal grounds at that moment, as Fernanda was still considered missing. After questioning, Aaron was released. Fernanda's family was distraught but determined not to give up. They printed flyers with her photograph and posted them everywhere. Erika used social media to ask for help, begging anyone with information to contact her. Friends and neighbors joined in, hanging large posters with Fernanda's face in central areas of Tijuana. Despite the extensive efforts, days turned into weeks. Fernanda had still not been found. 3 weeks after Fernanda's disappearance, Erika received 2 anonymous phone calls. The callers claimed that Fernanda's body was buried somewhere on her property. The information was disturbing and frightening, especially since the callers were unknown. But Erika could not ignore it. She immediately informed investigators and asked for their assistance. They did not act right away, explaining that the heavy rain made it impossible to begin a search. When authorities finally arrived to search the property, their initial efforts revealed nothing. However, some officers privately told the family that they had noticed areas of disturbed soil that deserved closer examination. They planned to return the following day with trained dogs and specialized equipment. Fernanda's family could not bear to wait. That night, her father, unable to rest, called Erika and suggested they go to the house to search on their own. The rain had stopped. They dug in the yard for hours, desperately hoping to find some sign of Fernanda. While they were there, Baudilio called Fernanda's father, immediately asking what they were doing at the house. The father replied that they had only come to feed the dogs. The conversation ended abruptly, and the father believed Baudilio seemed strangely calm. Shortly afterward, acquaintances and members of Baudilio's family arrived at the property. They claimed they only wanted to see what was happening, attempted to discourage Erika and her father from continuing the search. But Erika and her father refused to stop. Their fear of what might be hidden was greater than the pressure around them. Eventually, Baudilio's acquaintances left. They continued digging. For a long time, their efforts seemed hopeless. Eventually, they decided to move Fernanda's car, which was parked in the yard, and noticed that the ground underneath looked disturbed. Her father began digging there and soon uncovered a shallow grave. After a short time, they unearthed human remains. They immediately contacted the police. Specialists arrived quickly and began recovering the remains. The body was officially identified as Fernanda's, confirming the family's worst fears. Authorities released general information to the media but withheld details about Fernanda's cause of death. The case was officially classified as a violent crime, and an investigation was underway. Meanwhile, police worked to clarify what had happened. Although official statements were limited, local news reports suggested that Fernanda had been killed by a gunshot. 2 days later, a judge issued a warrant. Investigators carried out a thorough search of the house. According to official reports, stains resembling blood were found in the bathroom, the living room, on a sofa. These stains were invisible to the naked eye and only became apparent with specialized equipment. Investigators concluded that Fernanda had likely been killed inside the house, that attempts were made afterward to hide the evidence. Officers spoke to the acquaintances and neighbors. All the evidence points to Aaron's possible involvement in the case and suggests he helped conceal the body in the yard. One witness reported that, days before the incident, Aaron had, while under the influence of illegal substances, talked about getting money from the house. Although he had not openly threatened any violence, Aaron was eventually charged. However, at that time, his whereabouts were unknown, and the prosecutor's office released his photograph, asking the public for assistance in locating him. Fernanda's family offered a reward for any information leading to his capture. Since Fernanda's car had still not been located, authorities appealed for tips and asked that any relevant information be forwarded to both San Diego and Tijuana police. A few weeks later, on March 6, Aaron was arrested in San Diego, United States. However, the arrest was not related to Fernanda's case, but because he already had an extensive criminal record in the country. It appeared he may have been trying to hide with his father to avoid American authorities. His history included numerous offenses dating back to 2014. Since turning 18, he had been repeatedly targeted by police for possession, sale, and transportation of controlled substances, violent theft, weapons possession, participation in robberies, and according to some reports, affiliation with a street gang. Most recently, he had been arrested for weapons possession, obstructing law enforcement, and selling banned substances. Aaron was under court supervision and required to appear before a judge, but he failed to do so, prompting authorities to issue a warrant for his arrest. When he was finally brought into the courtroom, he appeared calm. His public defender insisted that Aaron had never intended to go into hiding, let alone flee to Mexico. The prosecutor, however, told the judge they were dealing with a man with a long criminal history connected to a street gang, who should not be released. Despite this, the judge decided to free Aaron without bail. Fernanda's family was initially relieved, but when they realized the extradition process would be lengthy and complicated, their confidence gave way to concern. In the meantime, they contacted the authorities. The family's lawyer said the extradition process could take at least 6 days before Aaron is brought back to Mexico to face charges of Fernanda's murder. At the time, Mexican authorities were already consulting with their American counterparts about how Aaron could be prosecuted for his crimes committed in both countries. The prosecutor's office confirmed that extradition proceedings had begun. Investigators later learned that Aaron was not alone on the day of the killing. He had been in the house with 2 young men, consuming illegal substances. Under the influence, he went to look for Fernanda and entered her room, supposedly to stop her from taking his father's money and belongings. He then shot her. Afterward, he wrapped her body in a blanket, carried it to the yard, and buried it. Later, he even attempted to attack Baudilio. Police had no information about who might have helped him conceal the evidence, and investigators continued gathering testimonies. 1 week later, Fernanda's sister stated publicly that she did not believe Aaron had acted alone. She contacted authorities and requested that the investigation be reopened. She also revealed that Baudilio himself had begun to suspect his son and had shared his fears with her. He had reached out to Aaron's mother and probation officer, both of whom were aware of the situation. Around this time, Aaron pleaded guilty to a charge of possession of controlled substances with intent to sell in the United States. He was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Fernanda's relatives, as well as Aaron's family and friends, including Baudilio, attended the hearing. Fernanda's family continued to march through the streets, demanding swift extradition, but then everything grew silent. More than a year passed without progress. The house where Fernanda had been killed and buried stood abandoned, with peeling paint, broken windows, curtains moving in the wind. People avoided the place. Children whispered about the cursed woman's house, and neighbors looked away when they walked by. Aaron was serving his sentence in the United States, but the question of extradition remained unresolved. Then Baudilio disappeared. One day, he failed to show up at work, did not call, did not pick up his children. The Tijuana police opened a new case into his disappearance, but there were no traces and no answers. All that remained were suspicions. Perhaps he knew more than he admitted, and someone did not want that truth to surface. Erika refused to give up. She found a new witness, a woman who lived on the next street. The woman told her she had seen a third man enter Fernanda's house on the day she vanished. No one had ever mentioned him before. He was tall, tattooed, and wore a hood. He did not stay long. He left quickly, as if in a hurry. Erika reported this to investigators, but there was no response. It was as though the truth was heading in a direction no one wanted to acknowledge. The family began receiving threats, anonymous phone calls, and envelopes with nothing inside except a photograph of Fernanda. A silent warning, but Erika pushed forward. She started a blog, recorded videos, and tried to draw media attention. 2 months later, a burned-out car was found in a wooded area near Tijuana. It was Fernanda's car. After years of agonizing waiting, relentless efforts by Erika and her family, the case finally took a major turn in 2025. On May 20th, Aaron Seth Juárez, now 26 years old, was officially extradited from the United States to Mexico after completing a 2-year prison sentence for banned substances-related offenses in San Diego. According to the Fiscalía General de la República, Aaron was handed over at the San Ysidro border crossing in cooperation between the U.S. and Mexican governments, based on an arrest warrant from the Juzgado de Control of Baja California for feminicidio. Preliminary evidence indicates that Aaron, while intoxicated by illegal banned substances, allegedly shot and killed Fernanda. He then reportedly buried her body in his yard, possibly with help from accomplices. Currently, Aaron is being held in custody in Tijuana, awaiting a formal trial in Poder Judicial de Baja California, facing charges that could result in a life sentence under the local criminal code. Erika, in a social media post, expressed relief mixed with outrage, stating, "Justice, belated, but it is still justice for her sister." This case not only closes a long chapter of waiting but also opens new questions about the role of Baudilio, who has been mysteriously missing since 2020, and the possible connections of the case to local criminal groups. Fernanda's family continues to follow the case closely, hoping the upcoming trial will shed light on the whole truth, bringing true peace to the soul of the woman who was taken too soon. The seductive predators with their handsome looks and the promise of a sweet future are the devil incarnate. They make their prey willingly walk into their trap, believing they have found love. Just weeks after the secret wedding in Las Vegas, Cynthia was brutally murdered. Her body was found in the desert, her throat cut so deep that it was almost severed. What unfolded next was not just a story of murder, but a tragedy of gullibility, greed, and the dark side of sweet promises. On December 24, 1988, an Arizona police station received a report from Pinal County, near the Superstition Mountains. Witnesses had discovered the body of a young woman showing clear signs of violence. She was dressed casually, with no purse or identification, making immediate identification impossible. There was a deep wound on her leg. Her clothing was soaked in blood, and her neck was brutally slashed, covered in multiple stab wounds. The autopsy revealed that the woman's injuries were even more horrific than they first appeared. Several deep stab wounds had pierced her neck, severing her spine, nearly decapitating her. 4 additional stab wounds had broken 2 ribs and penetrated her heart. The most chilling detail was a faint pattern of bruises on her left temple and eyebrow. The forensic pathologist suspected these marks were made by the sole of a shoe. Matching impressions were later found at the crime scene, suggesting that the killer had pressed his foot against her head to pin her down while inflicting the fatal wounds. Beyond these devastating injuries, the woman's body bore evidence of a prolonged struggle. Bruises on her face and torso, abrasions on her knees, and defensive wounds on her hands. It was clear the murder had been intentional and vicious. Detectives initially assumed the perpetrator was someone the victim knew. But with her identity still unknown, the investigation stalled. However, that same day, the situation changed when the county police department received a call from Kathy Monkman, who reported that her older sister had gone missing the day before. The missing woman's name was Cynthia Estelle Monkman, also known as Cindy. Kathy explained that her sister had failed to show up for a Christmas party planned for December 23rd, something entirely out of character. Since Cynthia had helped organize the event, she hadn't called or sent any message to explain her absence, and all attempts to reach her had gone unanswered. Kathy initially hesitated to contact police, assuming her sister might have changed her plans. But the next morning, the two were scheduled to fly home together to Illinois for the holidays. Kathy left a note and a 7:30 a.m. flight ticket, still hoping Cynthia would appear. When the plane took off and the seat beside her remained empty, Kathy felt a wave of dread. Something was terribly wrong. Kathy provided police with her sister's description, which matched the unidentified woman found in the desert. The timeline also aligned perfectly. Cynthia had gone missing just one day before the body's discovery. Investigators soon learned that shortly before her death, Cynthia had married a man she'd met only a few months earlier. After comparing available evidence, authorities concluded that the body was that of Cynthia Estelle Monkman, 30, a fact later confirmed through dental records and positively identified by her sister. Cynthia was born on September 16, 1958, in Pensacola, Florida. She and Kathy, born just 2 years apart, were inseparable from childhood. Their father, John Alexander Jack Monkman, was a psychologist, while their mother, Dorothy June Monkman, became a full-time homemaker after the children were born. A third child, Isasson, arrived 2 years later. When Jack accepted a new position, the family moved to Champaign, Illinois, where they built a quiet, happy life. Until tragedy struck. Dorothy was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died 2 years later, leaving Jack a widower with 3 young children, aged 6, 4, and 2. It was a crushing loss, but with the help of relatives, he managed to raise his children with love and stability. As they grew up, Cynthia and Kathy remained remarkably close. They attended college together, shared friends, and often took spontaneous road trips across the country to visit old acquaintances. In 1982, Kathy moved to Arizona to attend nursing school. She earned a master's degree in public health and built a promising career as a nutritionist. By 1983, at just 25, she was offered a leadership position at a major health center in Minnesota, a major step forward professionally. However, life far from her sister and family soon left her feeling isolated. By 1986, Cynthia decided to move back to Arizona, settling into an apartment not far from Kathy's home. Cynthia was a vibrant and attractive woman, always the center of attention wherever she went. She had many admirers, drawn to her charisma, confidence. Within the first month of moving back to Arizona, she met Mark, a local radio DJ and small-town celebrity. They quickly began dating. Their relationship was lively and passionate. They shared adventures, parties, but it was also tumultuous. Mark wanted to keep his carefree, party-fueled lifestyle, while Cynthia was ready to settle down, think seriously about starting a family. By July, 29-year-old Cynthia realized that their goals no longer aligned. She suggested they break up. The separation hit her hard. She struggled to cope with the emotional void that followed. To lift her spirits, she and her sister Kathy took a short beach trip to California. Despite their breakup, Cynthia and Mark still had lingering feelings for each other. Then, on the night of October 8, 1988, everything changed. At a lively local nightclub, Cynthia met 2 brothers, Michael Apelt and Rudy Apelt. Tall, handsome newcomers from Germany. Cynthia felt an immediate connection with Michael. Kathy quickly noticed that Cynthia was completely smitten. Michael, 5 years younger than Cynthia and the youngest of 7 siblings, spoke broken English, which made communication clumsy at first. Yet Cynthia insisted that they understood each other without words. Cynthia couldn't stop talking about him. Over breakfast, she told Kathy that Michael had already mentioned marriage. More than once. Kathy was skeptical, thinking it was too soon and possibly just infatuation. But Cynthia brushed off her sister's concern, saying it was just what she needed to forget about her failed relationship with Mark. Their mutual friend, Annette Clay, who had been with them that night, began seeing Rudy, and the 2 couples soon became inseparable, going on double dates, spending nearly every day together. Within a week, everything accelerated. Rudy moved in with Annette, and Michael moved in with Cynthia. The pace stunned Kathy, who worried that her sister's impulsive decisions would lead to trouble. The whirlwind romance continued through the fall. On December 17, Cynthia and Michael attended a friend's wedding together. Kathy noticed a gold band on her sister's finger and asked about it. To her shock, Cynthia admitted she had already married Michael. On October 28, just 3 weeks after they'd met, it was the first time Cynthia had ever kept such a secret from her sister. Now, only 2 months later, detectives were staring at her lifeless body. They analyzed the limited evidence collected at the desert crime scene: deer tracks, a length of nylon cord, and a blood-soaked beach towel. It was obvious that Cynthia had been deliberately driven to that isolated location to be killed and left behind. The murderer likely assumed the desert would hide the crime forever. But fate intervened when her body was discovered by chance. After learning the details of Cynthia's recent life, detectives focused on 2 possible suspects: her new husband, Michael, or her ex-boyfriend, Mark. The savagery of the attack suggested a deeply personal motive: rage, jealousy, or betrayal. Investigators soon uncovered more unsettling information. A few weeks before her death, one of Mark's former girlfriends had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. That case was still under review by the state's Supreme Court. Cynthia and Mark had spoken just 3 days before her murder. During the call, an argument broke out when Cynthia revealed she had married someone else. Although she managed to calm him down, Mark reportedly told her he would be in town for Christmas and wanted to meet her. When Cynthia failed to show up at the pre-Christmas party and didn't answer any calls, her loved ones grew worried. The next morning, Michael phoned Kathy, shouting frantically into the receiver, demanding to know where his wife was. He sounded intoxicated. Kathy, alarmed by his tone, tried to piece together what had happened, when he had last seen Cynthia, and whether she might have met Mark after all. For a brief moment, Kathy even wondered if her sister had run away with her ex. Kathy went to Cynthia's apartment, hoping to find some clue about her sister's disappearance. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No message. No hint of where she had gone. Cynthia's photo was now everywhere. On TV, in newspapers, plastered across Arizona. Her family was devastated. Then, just days later, they received a letter that Cynthia had mailed before her death. The timing made it chilling to read. In the letter, she wrote warmly about her new marriage and expressed a wish for everyone to meet and get to know each other better. She seemed hopeful, unaware of the tragedy to come. Because of the language barrier, her relatives had never really been able to communicate properly with Michael. That same day, as Cynthia's family learned the awful news, a detective fluent in German was sent to speak with Michael. Though relatively inexperienced with murder investigations, he was chosen because of his language skills. The decision proved useful. Michael opened up quickly, relieved to finally speak with someone he could fully understand. The detective focused on reconstructing the couple's final hours on December 23, 1988. The day everything went wrong. Michael appeared tense from the start, but he managed to recount his version of events. He claimed that earlier that day, he and Cynthia had taken her car to a dealership for maintenance and rented another vehicle to get home. According to him, Cynthia spent the afternoon preparing for a trip and told him she planned to meet some friends around 10 o'clock p.m. Michael said that around 7 o'clock p.m., while he was showering, he overheard Cynthia having a heated phone conversation. Her voice sounded emotional, angry, even, but he couldn't understand the words or identify who she was speaking to. Moments later, she shouted something about needing to take care of an issue, grabbed her purse and luggage, and left without explanation. By the time Michael got out of the shower, she was gone. He cooperated fully with detectives, allowing them to search the apartment and car. He even presented a restaurant receipt from that same evening, December 23, as proof of his whereabouts. When police checked the couple's answering machine, one message stood out. At 10 o'clock a.m., Mark had called, saying he'd seen a news report about a missing woman who looked like Cynthia. He sounded alarmed and asked for someone to call back. But detectives found his timing suspicious. News of Cynthia's disappearance had barely begun circulating, making it unlikely he could have seen the story so early. To investigators, it almost sounded like he was trying to get ahead of the story and distance himself from suspicion. Ironically, because of his limited English, Michael didn't even realize yet that his wife was dead. When police brought him, Rudy, and Annette in for questioning, all three appeared distraught. Michael broke down in tears, screaming and demanding to know what had happened to Cynthia. But soon after, the group was separated for individual interrogations. Investigators collected shoe prints, hair, and blood samples from each of them, while also verifying their alibis. Everything checked out. They were released shortly after. For now, suspicion shifted back to Mark, whose behavior was beginning to seem erratic. The lead investigator flew to California to interview Mark in person. Meanwhile, Cynthia's phone continued to receive multiple calls, each one from Mark, leaving message after message on her answering machine, as if he were desperately trying to reach her. But when the detective reviewed his movements, Mark's alibi held up. He had worked his full shift at the radio station that day, then rented a car and driven to Los Angeles to spend Christmas with his mother and sister. It was confirmed he couldn't have been in Arizona when Cynthia was killed. Cynthia's funeral was held on December 31, 1988. When Michael was invited to speak, he stepped to the podium, but couldn't say a single word. He broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, until Rudy led him away. The mourners took this as a sign of deep grief. But afterward, as everyone drove away from the cemetery, Kathy happened to pass the brothers' car. To her shock, she saw Michael and Rudy laughing and joking with Annette. The sight froze her. Just hours earlier, Michael had collapsed in tears over his wife's coffin. Now he was smiling as if nothing had happened. In that moment, Kathy's instincts told her something was terribly wrong. Michael's grief, she realized, might have been nothing more than an act. Kathy shared her growing doubts about Michael with the detectives. Her words made them pause. Something in the case didn't fit together neatly, and now law enforcement decided to re-interview everyone involved. The first person they called in was Kathy herself. This time, she provided a fuller account of the whirlwind romance that had unfolded before the murder. To the investigators, the German brothers, Michael and Rudy, now appeared increasingly suspicious. They were evasive about nearly everything: their work, their finances, even their pasts. Whenever asked for details, they dodged the questions or changed the subject. Kathy recalled that only a few days after meeting them, she spotted the brothers entering one of the cheapest motels in town. This was odd, considering they had boasted about staying at a luxurious resort and working in high-level banking. That same night, she realized $100 was missing from her purse. At the time, she convinced herself it must have been a coincidence. But now, she wasn't so sure. The brothers' appearance had always been flashy, designed to project the image of wealth. But beneath the surface, their stories were full of cracks. Within weeks, they spun a new tale. They had supposedly been fired from the bank and were waiting for their next big opportunity. In the meantime, they guilted the women into letting them stay in their apartments. Kathy could see how easily her sister had been drawn into their charm, though she now recognized how manipulative it all seemed in hindsight. Another strange detail was Cynthia's sudden, secret marriage. Just a week after moving in, Michael told her he was facing deportation and could only stay in the U.S. if they married immediately. Under pressure and blinded by affection, Cynthia agreed. The two were secretly married in Las Vegas on October 28, only 3 weeks after meeting. The rushed wedding now painted a far darker picture, one of coercion and exploitation rather than love. Detectives began digging into the brothers' background. They soon discovered that Cynthia was far from the first woman to fall for their act. Since arriving from Germany, the brothers had courted several women and proposed to more than one. What had seemed like a whirlwind romance between Cynthia and Michael now appeared to be part of a troubling pattern. When police found Cynthia's diary, the last entry, dated November 11, read like a woman trying to convince herself that her husband truly loved her. It was painfully clear she had doubts. Despite this, not direct evidence yet tied Michael, Rudy, or anyone else from Cynthia's circle to the murder. Detectives examined a car rented on the day of her death, but its tire tread didn't match the prints found in the desert. Forensic tests on the brothers' own car also came up empty. Then, on January 3, Michael unexpectedly reached out to the German-speaking detective. He claimed that after returning home from Cynthia's funeral, he had found a strange message on his answering machine. It sounded like a threat, but he couldn't fully understand it. He asked the detective to translate. The next day, January 4, Michael came to the station with the recording. The message was chilling. The caller threatened to kill Michael and his loved ones if certain unspecified items weren't delivered. The voice even claimed responsibility for slashing Cynthia's throat. But something about it immediately struck detectives as odd. The voice sounded unnatural, as if the person were reading from a script. The phrasing was awkward, the pronunciation off, when translated literally into German. However, the message suddenly made perfect sense, almost as if it had originally been written in German and then clumsily translated into English. The officers pretended to take the message seriously, but in reality, it only deepened their suspicions. The list of likely culprits was narrowing fast. Michael, Rudy, and Annette were now squarely in their sights. Police placed the group under 24-hour surveillance. On the evening of January 5, officers stationed near their apartment observed movement inside around 5:30 p.m. Then, at 8:30 p.m., an undercover agent knocked on their door, pretending to have the wrong address. His true goal was simply to confirm who was inside. Moments later, after the visit, Michael called the police in a panic. He claimed that 2 black men had come to his door and threatened him. It was an obvious fabrication, but the officers played along. Instead of confronting him, they invited him and his companions to the station the next day to help create composite sketches of these supposedly threatening men. Michael was interrogated for several hours while the rest of his group interrogated in separate rooms. The detectives deliberately dragged out the interrogation, cleverly introducing details about Cynthia's case and carefully watching for cracks in their composure, waiting for the first sign that someone's resolve was about to break. It was Annette who gave in first. Though she resisted confessing for a long time, her confidence began to crumble when one of the detectives placed crime scene photos of Cynthia's mutilated body in front of her. Under mounting pressure, detectives threatened Annette with murder charges if she continued to hide the truth. Cornered, she finally confessed. Annette said both Michael and Rudy were seeking permanent residency in the United States. Since they spoke little English, Annette had served as their translator and intermediary. Together, they had invented several identities, claiming at times to be surfboard manufacturers, and at others, importers of luxury German cars. That was how they had first presented themselves when they met Cynthia. In reality, the brothers had been living for months in a cheap Arizona motel, surviving off the money and generosity of women they seduced. They used their looks and voices to manipulate and extort money from those who have fallen for them. Annette did not admit to knowing about the murder plot, nor did she say it had been premeditated. But her statements revealed that her friendship with Cynthia had been based solely on financial gain. After moving in with Cynthia and marrying her, Michael continued to spend recklessly while Cynthia worked 2 jobs to support them both. He told her their bank accounts in Germany were temporarily frozen, promising that once the funds were released, they would live comfortably. Between October and December, Michael drained more than $4,000 from her savings. Then Michael started to get interested in an easy, luxurious life and wanted more. It was then that he devised a plan for fast money. On November 7, 1988, Michael convinced his wife to contact an insurance agent so they could take out matching life insurance policies for $1 million each. Naturally, Michael was listed as the primary beneficiary of Cynthia's policy. He continued to feed her lies about his frozen assets, claiming that the life insurance was simply a smart precaution until their fortune in Germany became available. Cynthia, deeply in love and trusting, agreed, without hesitation. The agent approved the policies, but the amount was reduced to $400,000. Cynthia immediately wrote the check, unaware she was signing her own death warrant. From that moment, Michael and Rudy began planning how they would spend the payout. They even drew up a purchase and sale agreement for 2 Jaguar cars, worth $144,000 each, and 2 Toyota cars, each worth $66,000. They were also looking for expensive items, fully aware that in order to obtain all this luxury, they would have to kill. The policy officially went into effect one day before Cynthia's death, and the coverage amount was later increased to $800,000. By then, the brothers had already rented a car, the same one they would use to lure Cynthia to the desert and kill her. According to Annette's statement, on the day of the murder, Michael and Rudy drove Cynthia out to the desert under the pretense of a short trip. Once there, they coaxed her out of the car and attacked her. Annette remained inside the vehicle, too terrified to intervene. The assault lasted roughly 5 minutes. When the brothers returned, they were covered in blood from head to toe. Calmly, they changed clothes, washed off the blood to avoid staining the rental car, and disposed of all evidence. That night, they went to a luxury restaurant to celebrate what they believed was a perfect crime, a murder that would soon make them rich. But their plan quickly began to unravel. Cynthia's body was discovered within hours, and the brothers' illusion of control crumbled almost instantly. Detectives soon began digging deeper into their background. Through cooperation with German authorities, they learned that Michael had no bank accounts, Neustadt, and no business ventures in Germany. His life there had been far from glamorous. He was a manual laborer with a criminal record for burglary and assault. His brother, Rudy, had also served time in prison for physical abuse. Given their criminal histories, police investigated possible links to other crimes in the United States, but none were found. It appeared that Cynthia was their first and only murder victim, yet one question still puzzled investigators. Why didn't the tire tracks at the crime scene match the rental car the brothers had used? The answer came later. Michael had anticipated that very issue. On the night of the murder, he deliberately drove in a way that damaged the tire tread. When they returned the car, the rental company had to replace all 4 tires, effectively erasing one of the most crucial pieces of physical evidence. The owner of the rental car helped police confirm the truth of the story after Cynthia's funeral to create the illusion of outside threats. Michael and Rudy had hired a random homeless man from the streets of Los Angeles. They paid him to call a specific phone number and read a scripted message filled with menacing words. Annette was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Michael and Rudy, an offer she quickly accepted. During a detailed search of the apartment shared by Michael and Cynthia, investigators discovered a pair of shoes whose soles matched the footprints found at the crime scene, confirming the brothers' involvement. Later, during the suspect's imprisonment, several handwritten notes containing incriminating information were also uncovered and used as evidence against them. During the trial, Michael made the reckless decision to testify in his own defense. Despite his lawyer's efforts to dissuade him, he insisted on speaking, believing himself more intelligent than everyone else. That arrogance became his downfall, as his statements were full of contradictions that only strengthened the jury's certainty of his guilt. Michael and Rudy desperately tried to shift the blame onto Annette, but their attempt failed. On August 10, 1990, the jury found Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing both brothers to death. However, in 2009, Rudy's death sentence was overturned after an IQ test determined that he was mentally disabled. Under federal law, people with mental disorders could not be sentenced to death. As they often didn't understand the gravity of their actions, Rudy's sentence was commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Michael's sentence, however, has remained unchanged, his legal team deliberately delaying appeals to postpone execution. Michael remains on death row to this day. The Supreme Court actually upheld his death sentence in 2019, on April 26, 2022. At the age of 62, Rudy Appelt died in prison at the Abrazo West campus. Cynthia's death left an unhealing wound on her family. The loss was so devastating that her sister Kathy struggled to trust men, or people in general, for decades, not marrying until she was 50. The murder of Cynthia Monkman was not a crime of passion but a calculated act of greed, committed by sociopaths who saw human life as nothing more than a tool to achieve material gain. Ironically, insurance companies, in their relentless pursuit of profit through high-value policies, had unknowingly given the killers a motive. That night, in the $3.5 million oceanfront villa, Robert and Wendy Spoor had just wished each other good night after a warm day spent with their children and grandchildren. Just an hour later, gunshots tore through the night. When police arrived, Robert was dead on the sofa, shot through the head. Wendy lay dying in the bathroom, shot twice in the temple. Despite heavy blood loss and labored breathing, she managed to call 911. There was no sign of forced entry or warning at the scene. The white-masked killer had patiently lurked in the shadows of their home for hours, then left as if he had never been there. 2 years later, the truth was revealed. The killer was none other than their son-in-law, former baseball player Daniel Serafini, and his secret lover. It was a cold, calculated assassination, hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect family. In 2021, Robert Gary Spoor, 70, and his wife Wendy Wood, 68, lived in Lake Tahoe, California. They owned a spacious, cozy lakeside home worth $3.5 million. Married for 45 years. They had 2 daughters, Adrian and Erin, both with families of their own. Despite living separately, the parents stayed very close to their children and loved spending time with their grandchildren. On June 5, 2021, Erin visited with her 2 sons. They spent most of that day together. At 7:35 p.m., Erin picked up the children and left. After seeing their daughter and grandchildren off, Robert and Wendy entered the house, got ready for bed, went upstairs and watched TV. They had no idea their peaceful evening was about to be shattered. Around 8:30 p.m., a call came into 911, but the caller couldn't speak clearly, only making faint, gurgling sounds. Alarmed, the dispatcher immediately sent police and paramedics. Police arrived first. On the second floor, they found Robert lying on the couch near the fireplace, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. His position suggested he was taken by surprise and didn't have time to react. Wendy was found nearby in the bathroom. She had been shot twice in the head but was still alive, and she had been the one to call 911. In critical condition, she could only say her name before losing consciousness. She was rushed to a local hospital with a grim prognosis. As paramedics fought to save Wendy, detectives began processing the scene. They recovered 6 spent .22 caliber shell casings, later confirming the weapon was a pistol. Investigators then searched the surrounding area. They obtained footage from security cameras near the lake, where a popular bike path and a highway run nearby. In the footage, a lone figure appears at 5:30 p.m., about 3 hours before the 911 call, walking along the bike path toward Robert's house. This person immediately drew attention, partly because no one else was outside at that time, and partly due to the unusual outfit. A black hoodie pulled up to cover the face, and the lower half of the face covered with white tape or a mask. The individual walked cautiously, looking around, then paused to watch the house before breaking into a run and moving in a crouch toward the property. He appeared to enter the home and remain inside for hours, not emerging until after Erin and her children left. Shortly after the 911 call, the same figure ran out of the house and disappeared. The footage suggested the suspect was male, but no identity could be determined. Police held a press conference, released the video, and asked the public for leads. No other nearby homes had reported break-ins or assaults, implying Robert and Wendy were specifically targeted. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the shooter knew them and was let in or had a key. Detectives began investigating Robert and Wendy's backgrounds to look for a motive. They have lived in the lake house for about 20 years. They met in college and remained inseparable. Besides raising their 2 daughters, they worked together in real estate and loved to travel. They had lived in Hong Kong before settling in California in 2000, a move that was deliberate and carefully chosen. Wendy grew up in a nearby suburb and always dreamed of living by Lake Tahoe, a picturesque place. That dream turned into a nightmare. Wendy barely survived the attack and was placed in intensive care with a severe head injury. She miraculously lived but had to relearn how to speak and even how to hold a spoon. Police guarded her closely, worried the attacker might return to silence a key witness. They also hoped she would recover enough to describe what she saw. At first, this wasn't possible due to her condition. So, investigators searched for clues on their own. With almost no physical evidence left behind by the killer, detectives examined Robert and Wendy's lives and relationships, looking for a motive. Especially in their business dealings, Robert and Wendy were wealthy, which could have drawn envy or hostility. But investigators found no threats, stalking, or hostile messages. Their daughter and others close to them had never heard of anything unusual. What seemed like a key lead eventually led to a dead end. Still, some things were noted. Robert was not always pleasant. He was sometimes rude, especially when it came to property and personal space. By November 2021, police had searched the homes of all family members, including Robert's, but found nothing useful. The murder weapon was never located, and no gun matched the shell casings from the scene. Despite ongoing efforts, the case stalled for 8 months. During that time, Wendy recovered enough to speak with detectives, but her information was less helpful than hoped. In February 2022, things shifted. Early that month, Adrienne held a press conference at her home. She couldn't sit still and was extremely worried about her mother, Wendy. She believes that solving the case might help her mother overcome the loss of her husband. At the press conference, she repeated what law enforcement had already learned and, at the end, offered a $150,000 reward for information leading to the identification of the person caught on camera. By then, Wendy could speak fully and had largely recovered physically, though she remained emotionally devastated. Unfortunately, her account did not advance the case. She said the attack happened while she was dozing. After the first shot to her head, she instinctively ran to the bathroom without seeing the shooter. A second shot knocked her unconscious and left her blind. Wendy later woke to her dog, licking her face. The attacker was gone. All she could do was call 911. She spent 6 weeks in intensive care, followed by a long rehabilitation. Even afterward, she remembered nothing more. She now understood she was in danger, fearing the attacker might return at any time. The uncertainty weighed heavily. She had no idea who would target her and her husband. Investigators hoped her memory would eventually return and yield crucial clues, but instead, a year after the attack, Wendy passed away. According to Erin, she could not bear the loss of her beloved husband, Robert. Afterward, Erin and Adrienne moved into a house on the lake. They inherited their parents' property and continued to seek justice, but without success. For nearly 2 years, the investigation remained stalled. Only on April 21, 2023, did the county sheriff's office release new public details. Even then, the suspect had not been caught. Authorities were just beginning to develop the most important leads in the case. On June 5, 2023, Adrienne went to the police, accusing Erin and her husband, Daniele Serafini, of being responsible for her parents' deaths. Erin was married to Daniel, a former Major League Baseball player who later played in Mexico. His career had been successful, but he had begun to encounter problems. In 2013, Daniel retired from professional baseball. Afterward, he founded a baseball academy and owned a bar called the Oak Tavern. He and his wife, Erin, ran a business together, following the example of her parents, Robert and Wendy. After that, Adrian filed a lawsuit against Erin and Daniel, alleging that they had manipulated Wendy into harming herself following a failed assassination attempt. Before her death, Wendy disinherited Erin. Adrian believes their motive is money. To seize $23 million and real estate, she believed Erin tried to persuade Wendy to make her the sole heir. Adrienne, however, wanted to restore the original agreement her parents had signed, which split the inheritance equally between the sisters. In the end, Erin did not receive any inheritance from her parents. Adrienne, despite having a boyfriend who had been convicted of robbery, received everything. Adrian's boyfriend had an alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect. Detectives investigated Adrian's accusations, but the results were not what she expected. 4 months later, on October 20, 2023, it was not Erin who was arrested, but 49-year-old Daniel and 33-year-old Samantha Scott. Samantha was already known to Robert, Wendy, and the rest of the family. Investigators alleged that Daniel targeted Robert and Wendy's wealth and began removing anyone who stood in his way. His in-laws were the first victims, beyond murder and attempted murder charges. Daniel was also charged with child abuse and child endangerment for allegedly ambushing his sons at a relative's home before opening fire. He was arrested in Winnemucca, Nevada, and Samantha was later apprehended in Las Vegas. Adrian is shocked by the cruelty of Daniel, who her parents treat like their own son. Erin, however, remained skeptical and insisted Daniel was innocent, calling the accusations lies. The sisters agreed on only one point. Neither expected Samantha to be involved. Daniel was known not only for his pitching career but also for a steroid scandal in 2008. That incident marked the beginning of his decline in professional sports. His contract was terminated, and he was subsequently waived by every major league team. Although he earned about $14 million over his career, he lost a significant portion in a divorce from his first wife, who left him after the steroid scandal. In 2012, Daniel married Erin. They moved into a large 5-bedroom home in Reno, Nevada, valued at over $1 million. Many investments and business ventures failed in succession, eventually leading to bankruptcy. Even when he opened the bar, Daniel had to ask his parents-in-law for a loan and managed to raise $240,000 to keep it running. But his spending did not decrease. His financial ambitions were too great. He repeatedly sought financial help from his wealthy in-laws, Robert and Wendy. By 2015, Daniel had lost his savings and accumulated $300,000 in debt. He kept seeking financial support, but it couldn't go on indefinitely. During this time, his behavior deteriorated. Even staff reported he began physically abusing them, something he hadn't done before. Erin stood by him, remembering who he had been and seeing what he was becoming. She worked as a horse trainer and didn't earn much, but the family tried to maintain their lifestyle. Daniel was used to spending freely, but his income no longer matched. He even took a job at a gold mine near their lake house, yet it still wasn't enough to cover his debts. Despite the financial difficulties, his family continued to spend as usual. Erin supported Daniel so steadfastly that Adrian began to suspect she might have been involved in the attempt on their parents' lives. Samantha Scott had known the family for years. She worked as a nanny who frequently cared for Daniel and Erin's sons. She met Erin long before the attack, initially approaching Erin for horse riding lessons. Samantha also babysat for other families. When she first started coming to the house, Daniel reportedly fell in love with her. Daniel said he was unhappy in his marriage because, after having 2 sons in a previous marriage, he didn't want more children. Despite that, he and Erin had 2 additional children. He stayed with Erin for the children's sake, but planned to divorce her once they grew up. Samantha sympathized with his situation and began an affair with him. After Samantha was arrested, she denied everything. At first, even her sisters doubted her guilt. She has been a friend of Robert and Wendy's family for many years. During Wendy's recovery from the attack, Samantha regularly visited the lake house and met with everyone to offer support. But her true role in the events was still unclear. The investigation was reaching its peak, and prosecutors were preparing their case. The first person to go to trial is Daniel Serafini. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution explained how they built their case and gathered evidence. Witnesses were crucial. One of Daniel's employees recognized him in the masked man video. Because of his distinctive gait, Daniel had a slight limp from a sports injury. Multiple witnesses also testified that he spread malicious rumors about his in-laws, Robert and Wendy, claiming they abused, beat, and starved their grandchildren during weekend or holiday visits. Years before the crime, other witnesses heard Daniel looking for a hitman to kill his wife's parents, offering $20,000 for the double murder, and approaching several men with legal troubles. A month before the crime, his attitude shifted. Daniel allegedly began saying he would kill Robert and Wendy himself. No one reported this because they didn't take him seriously. He was known to be hot-tempered and prone to dark jokes, so they assumed he was venting or joking. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. Daniel and Samantha stayed at a hotel in Verde, Nevada, near a gold mine where Daniel worked. The next day, their vehicles were seen near the mine. Initially, Samantha stated that on the day the murder occurred, she was at the hotel they had rented to secretly meet in Verde. Her story seemed credible. Cell phone data even supported it. But she made one mistake. A Subaru matching hers, without license plates, was seen near the lake house less than an hour before the attack. Detectives believe she dropped Daniel off near the house and waited to pick him up after the murders. Her car's geolocation confirmed she was near the crime scene at the time of the shooting. During the preliminary hearing, the defense strategy became clear. The defense attorney wants to persuade the jury that Wendy and Robert are cruel, manipulative people who, for many years, oppressed Daniel, forcing him to use force. They cited a 2018 restraining order against Robert after he provoked a conflict and attacked a fisherman near their home. The defense also attempted to shift suspicion to Adrian, claiming she benefited financially from Robert and Wendy's deaths and had accused Erin and Daniel unfairly. Adrian's then-boyfriend was considered, but ruled out due to a solid alibi. A fierce legal battle loomed, and Samantha still faced trial. In February 2025, she accepted a plea deal. She would plead guilty to conspiracy. In return, prosecutors dropped the murder, attempted murder, and burglary charges. She would be tried only for complicity and, in exchange, testify against Daniel. After accepting the deal, she was placed under house arrest, angering Adrian and Erin, who believed she belonged in prison. Daniel Serafini's trial began on May 19, 2025. Early in the proceedings, the prosecution presented messages in which Daniel told Samantha he would one day kill his in-laws, Robert and Wendy. The defense countered that Daniel had no motive to kill them because they paid many of their daughter's expenses and also supported him financially. Specifically, he received a $90,000 check from them just days before Robert's death. According to the prosecution, Samantha and Daniel had a highly emotional relationship. Because of her feelings, Samantha lied in 2021 to cover for him, though her perjury was excused under the plea agreement. A striking detail was that the affair continued even after Daniel was incarcerated. He regularly sent her love letters, decorated with origami roses made from prison toilet paper. The prosecution called several witnesses, including Daniel's former boss. He testified that one day, while driving Daniel to work, Daniel, in a fit of rage, said he wanted to kill his wife's parents, Robert and Wendy. He justified this by claiming they were abusing his children. He seemed to genuinely believe it. Yet there was no evidence supporting any abuse by Robert or Wendy. In response, the boss suggested Daniel simply stop taking the children to his in-laws' house to avoid conflict. Daniel refused and changed the subject. His former boss did not call the police because he believed Daniel's words were just a spur-of-the-moment outburst, not a serious one. The prosecutor also argued that Daniel's phone activity on the day of the shooting was suspicious. Normally, he sent more than 100 texts a day and made frequent calls, but that day he sent none. An unusual change. Daniel's brother, Giorafini, also testified. According to Giorafini, Daniel tried to hire him to kill his parents-in-law for $20,000. Samantha, testifying against Daniel, said she drove him to the lake house and later picked him up after the double murder, though she claimed she did not know why he was going there. Daniel avoided discussing the murders, saying he was only trying to buy banned substance and hadn't planned to kill anyone. Samantha's credibility was questioned, but after accepting a plea deal, she said she was telling the truth. Even Daniel defended her, claiming she genuinely didn't know his plans. He kept his intentions secret, but asked her for a ride. From the start, his requests were suspicious. He wanted to remove all identifying marks from Samantha's car, even suggesting destroying it and reporting it stolen to the police. Samantha refused. Daniel then offered her $5,000 for the trip, on the condition that she replaced the car afterward. She agreed, partly because he refused to share details. After she picked him up, he changed the route, and they took a long detour. While Samantha drove, Daniel threw clothing out of the car piece by piece. He got rid of a pair of gloves and a face mask, then disassembled a gun and disposed of its parts the same way. Samantha continued to insist that he never told her what happened and that she assumed he was being secretive because of a banned substance. She said that only months later, during the investigation, did Daniel admit to shooting Wendy, while saying nothing about Robert. When Daniel's wife, Erin, testified, she defended him and claimed Samantha had pushed Daniel toward murder. Erin said she felt deceived, not betrayed. Erin argued that it made no sense for Daniel to kill her parents, since they had been financially supporting the couple. Now that support was gone. The prosecution, however, argued that Erin was deluded and that the trial may have saved her life. They claimed that for Daniel to access Robert and Wendy's inheritance, he needed to remain married to Erin, and then she would have to die. In their view, Erin could have been the next target, as she was the final obstacle between Daniel and her parents' money. On July 14, 2025, a jury found 50-year-old Daniel Serafini guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and first-degree burglary. He faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. On August 19, 2025, before sentencing, Daniel filed a motion for a new trial. In February 2025, Samantha Scott pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. She was released pending sentencing and faces up to 3 years in prison. Following the verdict, Erin Serafini filed for divorce and sought custody of her 2 sons, who were 7 and 4 years old at the time of Daniel's sentencing. Notably, she remained on good terms with Daniel throughout the trial and did not request restrictions on his visitation with the children. This led some people following the case to suspect Erin was involved, but there was never any evidence to support it. She was never charged, and her alleged involvement was never proven. Some neighbors and family friends cited her strained relationship with her parents as indirect evidence, but this remained hearsay. Erin was known to frequently ask her parents for money, which caused repeated conflicts. Even Adrian described Erin as a troublemaker and the family's black sheep. Morning of November 24, 1987, on the deserted Parson Creek Road in Skagit County, Washington, a truck driver stopped on the side of the road and discovered a scene that stunned him. Amidst the rotting leaves and mud, the body of a young woman lay discarded like trash, clothes disheveled, hands bound with duct tape, A bullet through her head. 2 days later, more than 60 miles away, under the high bridge in Snohomish County, police were shocked to find the body of a young man strangled with rope. Covered with an old blanket, there were no cameras, no witnesses, just a few strands of hair, traces of semen, and a torn ferry ticket in the abandoned van in Bellingham. For more than 3 decades, police had followed every lead, but nothing had come up. It wasn't until DNA genealogy technology was used to build a family tree from the killer's DNA that a name suddenly emerged: William Earl Talbot. The case not only ended a tragedy, but also ushered in a new era of justice, where time may fade, but DNA never forgets. Tanya van Cuylenborg was born on March 7, 1969, in Victoria, Canada. She grew up with loving parents and was very close to her older brother. From a young age, she adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She also wanted to travel the world. A high school trip to Paris with her best friend strengthened that dream. At 18, shortly before graduating, Tanya met Jay Cook, who was 2 years older and had attended the same school. They were introduced by a mutual friend after Jay graduated and soon began dating. Although Tanya still hoped to study veterinary medicine, she chose to delay college to travel. After graduation, she worked at a cafe to save money and also took a job walking dogs. Jay didn't go to college either. He worked with his father, who ran a small heating installation business. In November 1987, Jay's father received an order, but couldn't find a key part locally. The nearest supplier was in Seattle, Washington. Instead of placing a delivery order, he wanted to go buy it himself for speed and lower cost. But since he was busy, he asked Jay to go in his place. Jay agreed and invited Tanya to come along, hoping the trip would bond them. They had been dating for about 6 months, and Tanya happily accepted. The plan was simple: leave Victoria in the morning, arrive in Seattle by evening, and return the next day. Jay's father lent them his van and gave money for a hotel, but Jay and Tanya decided to save the hotel money and sleep in the van. He also gave Jay a $700 check for the part and additional cash for expenses. Even though Seattle isn't far from Victoria, the route required 2 ferries, one to enter the U.S. and another to cross the bay near Seattle. On the morning of November 18, they left for the first ferry to Port Angeles. Their parents expected them home the following afternoon, but Tanya and Jay never returned. Knowing the ferry schedule, the 2 families were worried because they should have arrived home by now, but they were nowhere to be found. At first, the parents considered that they might have stopped to sightsee and missed the ferry. As more time passed with no word, Tanya's parents called Jay's parents. By afternoon, both families feared something was wrong. They still hoped Tanya and Jay were simply extending their trip, but their worries grew. When they still had not returned by the end of the day, their parents went to the police the next morning to report them missing. The police declined to launch a search, noting that Tanya was 18 and Jay was 20, and there was no evidence of foul play. They suggested waiting a few more days, assuming Tanya and Jay left on their own. The families were frustrated and disagreed, but the police refused to act. By then, both families were certain Tanya and Jay wouldn't have extended the trip without calling. Jay had an important task for his father's business and wasn't irresponsible. And if plans had changed, they could have called from any of the many payphones along the route. Tanya's father decided to search on his own. He and Jay's parents confirmed that Jay had never gone to pick up the parts in Seattle. The supplier said they had waited for several hours, but no one showed up. Tanya's father drove the entire route to Seattle, but found no trace of Tanya, Jay, or their truck. Not giving up, he hired a private helicopter to fly along their planned route. However, the aerial search was also hopeless because the area was mostly forested, making it difficult to observe. He then made missing person flyers and spent several days posting them around Seattle. The families pressed relentlessly for action, and the local police finally took the case more seriously, though they still suspected Tanya and Jay were simply off together and would return. Therefore, they only contacted the Seattle police, provided a description of the truck and information about Tanya and Jay, and asked to be notified if there were any findings. On November 24, 5 days after the disappearance, a man walking near a wooded embankment about 90 miles north of Seattle saw something unusual under a tree. On closer inspection, he realized it was a body and called police. Officers found the body of a young woman. Her clothing was partially missing. Her hands were bound, and she had a gunshot wound to the head. The lack of blood at the scene indicated she had been killed elsewhere. The victim had no identification, so police checked it against a list of missing women in the area. They quickly found the victim matched Tanya Van Cuylenborg's description and contacted her father. He went to the morgue and confirmed it was his daughter. Police learned that Tanya had gone on a trip with her boyfriend, Jay, who was still missing. Jay's truck was also missing, prompting them to consider his involvement. The Jay family refuted this, saying he is gentle, loves Tanya, has never been aggressive, does not own a gun, and would also find it difficult to obtain one. While police were searching for Jay, they received another call. A bartender in Bellingham, about 18 miles from where the body was found, picked up a wallet and keys on the road. The wallet contained identification in the name of Tanya Van Cuylenborg. At first, he didn't call the police, but instead took the items back to the bar, thinking the owner would come looking for them. But after seeing the news of Tanya's murder on TV, he immediately called 911. The police searched the area around the bar and found, under the back porch, several plastic zip ties identical to the kind used to bind Tanya's hands, along with rubber gloves and a partially used box of ammunition. Nearby, an officer spotted a van. It was the same vehicle Tanya and Jay had been driving. Inside the car was a mess. Belongings were scattered and damaged. But there were also a few important clues. Numerous receipts that help reconstruct Tanya and Jay's journey, and a ferry ticket indicating they had reached Seattle, where something terrible may have happened. Detectives also noticed that the camera Tanya had been carrying was missing. Since it was not at the scene of the body, they suspected the killer had taken it. The van's interior was stained with blood, which forensic teams collected for testing. Although DNA analysis was still new, a Seattle lab examined the samples and identified 3 profiles: Tanya's, Jay's, and an unknown male's. With no national DNA database at the time, the third profile could not be matched. This evidence led detectives to conclude Jay was likely not the killer. The pressing questions became, was Jay still alive? And where was he? Sadly, the answer emerged quickly. On November 26, a group of friends hunting a few dozen miles from Seattle discovered a body in the bushes near a small river bridge and alerted police. The victim was quickly identified as Jay Cook. He had multiple bruises, and the apparent cause of death was strangulation. Because of the crime's brutality, detectives considered that the killer might have known Jay and acted out of a personal motive. They also believe Jay was killed first. Since his body was found closer to Seattle, the killer then likely drove Tanya in the van toward the Canadian border, murdered her, and left her in a wooded area. Forensic experts found semen on Tanya, and DNA analysis matched blood found in the van, indicating the same man was responsible. However, his identity remained unknown. Investigators attempted to trace Tanya and Jay's movements using receipts found in the car to establish a timeline. After taking the ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles, Tanya and Jay bought food at a store. They then headed toward Seattle. But Jay appears to have missed the fastest route. This was supported by a receipt from a store in Hoodsport and a clerk's testimony. The clerk remembered a young couple matching their description who asked for directions to the ferry. The clerk also noted a suspicious detail. A man in a brown raincoat seemed to be following them. He entered the store right after them and left right after them, although she didn't see where he went. A later receipt placed Tanya and Jay at a store in the town of Allen. After that, they reached the ferry near Seattle and bought a ticket. Several witnesses saw them in that area, but their movements afterward could not be traced. Police reviewed individuals in Seattle with violent crime histories, but found no viable suspects. Despite having the killer's DNA, investigators had no way to identify him. They suspected he had offended before. Given the sophistication of the crime, detectives believe the killer may have been stalking Tanya and Jay for some time and kidnapped them when they arrived in Seattle. He might have gained their trust by asking for a ride and later used a gun to control them. Detectives also suspect he deliberately left Tanya's belongings and rubber gloves in plain sight to taunt police, implying that fingerprints would be useless because he was wearing gloves. Several fingerprints found in the van did not belong to Tanya or Jay, but investigators doubted they were the killers for the same reason. The prints did not match any database entries and did not advance the case. For weeks, detectives searched for leads and checked suspects without success. Then, in December, about a month after the murders, something unexpected happened. Tanya's and Jay's families began receiving letters and postcards from someone claiming to be the killer. The sender confessed, mocked the families, and bragged that he would never be caught. Investigators tried to trace the source, but that was extremely difficult at the time. They could only determine the city the letter was sent from, but that wasn't enough to identify the culprit. The letters kept coming, often on holidays, apparently to inflict maximum pain. They were mailed from multiple cities and states, suggesting the sender traveled frequently. Still, investigators were not certain the writer was the killer. In high-profile cases, hoax letters from people pretending to be the perpetrator are unfortunately common. Since then, the case saw little progress for years. Detectives continued pursuing suspects and considered the possibility of a serial killer. This idea stemmed from two other couples being abducted in the same region around that time. Though police considered the connections weak, over the following years, several serial killers were arrested in the area, but none were tied to the murders of Tanya and Jay. In 2003, the case was reopened, and the perpetrator's DNA was entered into the FBI database. No matches were found. Investigators still believe the killer likely had a lengthy criminal history, but had either avoided arrest or been arrested before mandatory DNA collection. In 2010, the case was featured on a popular national TV show, generating many new tips. Someone called and said they knew who sent the letter to Tanya and Jay's family. This lead pointed to a 78-year-old Seattle man. Investigations revealed that he had traveled across the United States, and the locations he visited matched the locations where the letters were sent. Detectives concluded he had written the letters, but had no role in the murders. The man showed clear signs of severe mental illness, and his DNA did not match the blood and semen from the crime scenes. This confirmed the letters were from an unrelated individual, not the killer. The case remained cold for several more years. In 2018, detectives learned about Parabon, a company that creates composite sketches from DNA. With no other leads, they tried this approach. Parabon produced age-progressed sketches of the killer, which police released to the media. New useful tips emerged. Investigators then turned to genetic genealogy. Parabon uploaded the killer's DNA to a public database to search for distant relatives. They quickly identified a person who could be the suspect's second cousin and traced the genealogy. The goal is to find a man who lived in Seattle or the surrounding area in 1987, matching the age and other criteria. With the cousin's help, they identified a suspect, 55 years old, William Earl Talbot, a truck driver living in a Seattle suburb. Before making an arrest, police needed to confirm the DNA match. After a brief surveillance, they collected a discarded coffee cup from William. The saliva provided a DNA profile that perfectly matched the killer's. In mid-May 2018, 30 years after the murders, investigators arrested William. He denied involvement, and the case went to trial in 2019. The defense attorneys sought to dismiss the DNA evidence, arguing that the semen on Tanya's body was likely consensual, and that there was no direct evidence tying William to Jay's murder. However, the prosecution had a strong argument. In 1987, fingerprints found on the van did not match Tanya, Jay, or anyone in the database. Those prints now matched William's. Another piece of evidence came from William's friend, who said he saw a brown truck parked in front of William's house in 1987 that was not William's. This suggests that William may have driven the truck home, though it is unclear whether it was before or after the crime. Additionally, William's home was only a few miles from where Jay's body was found, suggesting he was familiar with the area. None of William's relatives attended the trial, but they provided extensive information to investigators. They described him as consistently aggressive, and many family members feared him. Most cut off contact after he moved out. When they learned of the charges, they were not surprised and considered him capable of such crimes. The prosecution argued that William asked Tanya and Jay for a ride to Seattle under false pretenses. After they arrived at night, he allegedly used a gun to force them to drive to a remote location. He then killed them at separate sites, discarded Tanya's belongings, abandoned the van in another town, and avoided detection for 30 years. Despite the lack of a confession and some missing details, the evidence was compelling enough that almost no one doubted William's guilt. The trial concluded in June 2019. William was convicted of both murders and sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. It was the first case in which genetic genealogy led to a conviction. After the verdict, an unexpected issue arose. William's attorneys appealed, claiming the jury was biased, violating his constitutional rights and making the jurors unfit to serve. A judge overturned the conviction in 2021 and ordered a new trial. However, in 2022, a higher court reinstated the original conviction. William's possible involvement in other crimes remains unclear. He had prior convictions for lesser offenses, but had never been charged with murder. Investigators suspect he may be connected to other unsolved cases because the killings of Tanya and Jay did not appear amateurish. The methodical execution and his decades-long evasion of law enforcement suggest he may have killed before, though we may never know for sure. The story begins with a young love, gentle, innocent. Their future seemed full of promise. But without warning, she suddenly disappeared, especially when her child was about to be born. What started as a missing person case soon spiraled into one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes the Dominican Republic had ever seen. This is the story of Emily Peguero, a story of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for justice that would shake an entire country. Emily was born on July 12, 2001, in Cenoví, a small town about an hour's drive from Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. She was the youngest child of Adalgisa Polanco and Gennaro Peguero. Even as she grew older, her older siblings continued to treat her like their little baby, constantly shielding her from life's hardships. Pretty, cheerful, and kind-hearted, Emily, with her signature dimples, dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. She wanted to help those who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Growing up in a humble household, she promised herself that she would work pro bono to bring justice to people like her own family. Emily was deeply empathetic and always sought to make the world a better place in whatever small way she could. The Peguero family lived in a modest house with shuttered windows, a flat roof, and a faded butterfly mural painted across the front wall. Her parents worked multiple low-paying jobs just to make ends meet. Despite the lack of luxuries, Emily was always provided with what mattered most: love, care, and a sense of security. The family's financial struggles never dimmed her spirit. She is very good at studying, friendly and outgoing, enjoys spending time with friends and family. Emily enjoyed applying stage makeup, dressing up in costumes, and putting on little performances to make her loved ones laugh. For her parents, all the daily worries disappeared. Whenever they watched their youngest daughter dancing and smiling, the Peguero family might not have had much, but they were rich in love. Warmth. That was enough. When Emily turned 15, she began dating a boy named Marlon Martinez, who was 18 at the time. They had known each other since childhood, and their relationship had blossomed from a gentle friendship into young love. Marlon had been born in the United States, but when he was around 8 or 9 years old, his family returned to the Dominican Republic and settled in a large house with a manicured front yard. Directly across from Emily's humble home, his mother and stepfather were financially well off, sending him to a prestigious private school in the suburbs. Marlon's mother, Marlon Martinez, was a prominent political figure. At one point, she had even served as the deputy mayor of the province. At the time of the events, she worked for the government, handling visa and passport services and participating in various political campaigns. This position gave her access to influential people and powerful connections. Rumors circulated that Marlon often used her authority to help certain individuals obtain documents illegally, that many people owed her favors. She was never held accountable, as there was always someone protecting her from the consequences. To be honest, Marlon was not a pleasant woman. Emily's father, who had once worked as a private security guard for her, knew firsthand how aggressive, short-tempered she could be. She acted as if her money and influence placed her above everyone else. The townspeople whispered behind her back, calling her the devil for her arrogance. Cruelty. Driven by political ambition and career demands, Marlon often needed help caring for her 3 sons, including Marlon. Instead of hiring a professional nanny, she turned to her neighbor, Adalgisa, Emily's mother, and paid Adalgisa to look after the boys while she worked. Every morning, Marlon would send her children across the street to Adalgisa's house, where they spent hours under her care. The children from both families quickly became inseparable, spending long afternoons playing together in the quiet neighborhood. The Martinez boys often slept overnight at the Peguero home, a sign that Marlon had great confidence in Adalgisa's care for her sons. Despite their stark social differences, the two families developed a surprisingly close bond through these everyday interactions. For years, all the children treated one another like siblings. But as they grew older, life slowly pulled them in different directions, and their once frequent visits became occasional. When Emily turned 15 and Marlon was 18, the two reconnected. At first, they were simply spending time together, reminiscing about their childhood. But soon, friendship turned into something deeper. As secret romances, the legal age of marriage in the Dominican Republic is 18, and Emily is still a minor. Her family disapproved, mostly because of Marlon's mother. Marlon was known for her arrogance and temper. She had recently quarreled with another neighbor over a trivial issue, further damaging her reputation. Yet Marlon himself seemed nothing like his mother. He was polite, quiet, and in a way, almost like a member of the Peguero family. Emily's father, Genaro, does not like this relationship, but cannot stop it. His daughter was clearly in love, and he didn't want to push her away. However, deep down, Genaro still felt uneasy, mainly because he knew what kind of person Marlon was. By 2017, as Emily's 16th birthday approached, her relationship with Marlon seemed stable. They were young, happy, and hopeful about the future. But that spring, something unexpected happened. Emily began to feel unwell and didn't understand why. Marlon, being older, quickly realized what might be going on. A few tests later, their fears were confirmed. Emily was pregnant. The news shocked both of them. In the Dominican Republic, abortion is prohibited in nearly all circumstances. It's considered a criminal offense. And since 2012, anyone assisting in an abortion, doctors, friends, or family, can face prison time. Emily, terrified and confused, knew she would have to carry the baby to term. She herself was still a child. Not knowing how she could raise another child, Marlon tried to reassure her, promising that everything would be fine. But Emily was terrified to tell her parents. She didn't know how they would react. Disappointment, anger, shame. Eventually, she gathered her courage and confided in her mother and older sister. Her father, I didn't find out until much later. One afternoon, about 5 months into the pregnancy, Gennaro came home during his lunch break. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed the uneasy looks on his wife's and daughter's faces. When he asked what was wrong, Adalgisa told him the truth. Their youngest daughter was 5 months pregnant. For a few moments, he couldn't speak. He was heartbroken, angry, and scared all at once. After half an hour of silence, he finally told his wife he would talk to the young couple, but that he needed time to process the news first. Tragically, Gennaro would never get that chance. He learned about Emily's pregnancy just 9 days before she disappeared. About a week later, Roberto Cabrera, Marlon's stepfather, visited Gennaro, suggested they meet to discuss the baby's future. Gennaro agreed. Together with Marlon and Roberto, they sat down to talk. Marlon assured Gennaro that he would take responsibility for the child and care for Emily. Roberto also promised to support the child in any way possible. That conversation eased Gennaro's worries somewhat, though he still struggled to accept that his little girl was about to become a mother. He set one condition: Emily and the baby would stay with Peguero family after the birth. Since she was still a minor, both families would share the responsibility of caring for the child until Emily turned 18. Marlon seemed to agree, and Roberto supported the plan. But there was one person who was far from happy about the situation: Marlon. For her, her son's relationship with a poor teenage girl and pregnancy was not only inconvenient, it was an embarrassment she wanted to erase at any cost. She believed Marlon throwing his future away. In her mind, this child would ruin everything: his education, his ambitions, and the family's spotless reputation. Marlon feared what people would say if they learned that her son, from a respectable and well-off household, had gotten a girl from a modest background pregnant. She had tolerated their teenage relationship in silence, convincing herself it was just a passing phase. But pregnancy, in her eyes, was an unforgivable mistake. On the morning of August 23, 2017, 16-year-old Emily woke up earlier than usual. Adalgisa noticed and asked where she was headed so early. Emily smiled softly and said that Marlon had promised to take her to a doctor's appointment to pick up her test results. Adalgisa saw her to the front door, watched Emily get into Marlon's car and drive away. Completely unaware that it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive, the morning passed quietly. Adalgisa prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and waited for Emily to return. But as the clock ticked past the hour, a faint sense of unease began to creep in. Emily was always punctual, and if she were delayed, she would at least send a message or call. By late morning, Adalgisa's unease had grown into panic. At 11:30 a.m., Emily's sister received a strange text message. It said that Marlon had dropped Emily off at a gas station because she wanted to meet her uncle. The message should have been reassuring, but instead, it sent chills down their spines. Emily never sent texts. She preferred voice messages, and she had never mentioned meeting her uncle before. Even the tone of the message was off. It didn't sound like her at all. Something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Adalgisa sent her older daughter to Martina's house. When Marlon opened the door, he appeared calm and explained that on their way to the clinic, Emily realized she had mixed up the dates. The test results wouldn't be ready until Friday. According to him, Emily then asked to be dropped off at a gas station because she was meeting her uncle. He said he gave her some money, watched her get in the car and drive away. That, he said, was the last time he saw her, but Adalgisa didn't believe him. Together with her elder daughter, She rushed to the gas station and asked the employees to review the security footage. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. There was no sign of Emily or Marlon at the station that morning. Either Marlon had made a mistake, or he was lying. Yet, when confronted again, Marlon stubbornly repeated his story. By the afternoon, Adalgisa's panic had turned into full-blown terror. She called the police to report her pregnant teenage daughter missing. The family began printing and distributing flyers with Emily's face, hoping someone had seen her. Deep down, though, they didn't believe she had been kidnapped by a stranger. They were certain the answer lay much closer to home, with Marlon and his mother. When speaking to reporters, Adalgisa didn't hide her suspicions. Her husband, Genaro, had recently discovered disturbing messages on Emily's phone, texts from Marlon's mother, sent 4 days before Emily disappeared. The messages showed that she had been pressuring Emily to terminate her pregnancy, offering to help her end it quietly at home. She promised that everything would go smoothly, that Emily had nothing to fear. Emily initially refused, but after days of emotional pressure, she seemed to give in, agreeing to let Marlon assist her. For Emily's parents, those messages were proof of a sinister plan. They believed Marlon was desperate to erase the shame of an unplanned pregnancy, no matter the cost. When Genaro handed those messages to investigators, suspicion toward the Martinez family intensified. What shocked everyone most was that Marlon immediately hired a lawyer, something no innocent teenager would do. The gesture spoke volumes, suggesting guilt, not grief. After the first 24 hours passed with no sign of Emily, fear spread throughout the neighborhood. Rumors began to swirl. Everyone whispered that the Martinez family had something to do with her disappearance. At home, Genaro was a man shattered. He couldn't stop imagining what might have happened to his daughter, whether she was cold, hurt, or terrified somewhere. Calling out for help he couldn't give. Alone, he cried quietly, his body trembling with despair. But in front of his family, he forced himself to stay strong. He knew that if they saw him break down, their hope would shatter completely. After news of Emily, the missing pregnant girl, spread throughout the community. Rumors of her boyfriend's family's involvement began to circulate. Marlon and his mother decided to hold a press conference to deny the rumors and clear their name. Using her wide network of contacts, Marlon invited several reporters to attend, hoping to quickly put an end to the public suspicion surrounding her family. The conference was held in the living room of the Martinez family home. Marlon appeared in a simple t-shirt and jeans, visibly uneasy. Throughout the interview, he kept his head down, his hands trembling as he spoke. His mother, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Elegantly dressed in a formal suit, with her hair perfectly styled, exuding confidence and authority. Having previously served as a deputy and local government official, she was accustomed to addressing the public. Even so, the first questions were directed at her son. Marlon recounted the same story he had told before. Then, for the first time, he looked straight into the camera and pleaded for Emily to return home. He admitted that, like any couple, they had problems, but insisted that their families had accepted the unexpected pregnancy and were excited for the baby's arrival. After he finished, Marlon took over the conversation, firmly denying every accusation against her family. She claimed that neither she nor her son had anything to do with Emily's disappearance, asserting that on that same morning, Marlon had accompanied Emily's grandmother to the consulate to handle paperwork, an attempt to present an alibi, and emphasize how close the two families supposedly were. During the press event, Marlon repeatedly stressed that Emily was like part of their family, and that they loved her deeply. She referred to Emily as the girl who carried her future grandchild, saying they were as worried for her safety as the Peguero family was. However, instead of clearing their names, the press conference only raised more suspicion. People found it odd that the Martinez family had not invited the Peguero family to speak as well. To the public, The event seemed less like a genuine plea for truth and more like a staged attempt at self-defense. Viewers also noticed a chilling detail. Both mother and son spoke about Emily in the past tense, as if they already knew she was dead. This small but telling slip convinced many that they knew far more about what had happened than they were admitting. Soon, public opinion turned completely against them. Many came to believe it was a classic case of a wealthy, powerful family silencing a poor young girl to protect their reputation. Instead of calming speculation, the press conference had only fueled the outrage. Despite the mounting tension, Marlon decided to visit the Peguero family home. Seeing their grief-stricken faces, he realized there was no escaping the situation. Feeling cornered and fearing what would come next, he went to the police and turned himself in. On August 26, 2017, Marlon Martinez was officially arrested as the main suspect in Emily's disappearance and placed in a detention center. But the most crucial question remained unanswered. Was Emily still alive? 5 days after Emily went missing, on Monday, August 28, police had a breakthrough. They managed to trace Emily's phone signal to an apartment in the upscale San Francisco de Macorís district, an apartment belonging to Marlene Martinez. When officers conducted a search of the premises, they made a disturbing discovery: blood stains on a mattress and several blood-soaked towels. All the evidence was immediately sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. Everything now pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. Whatever had happened to Emily, it had happened inside that apartment. Meanwhile, the police continued questioning potential witnesses. August 30th, 2017. The security guard of the apartment building where the Martinez family owned a flat revealed shocking information. He said that on the day Emily disappeared, August 23rd, he saw Marlon Martinez on the surveillance cameras carrying a large bag out of the building and loading it into his car. Unsure of what to do, the guard decided to call Marlon. She came downstairs to see the footage for herself. While watching the video, she became visibly nervous. A short time later, the recording mysteriously vanished. Later that same day, Marlon confessed everything to the police. The Peguero family's worst fears were confirmed. Marlon admitted that Emily was dead. He told investigators that he had left her body at a local garbage dump. The news devastated not only Emily's loved ones but also the entire community. Many people followed the story, hoping that Emily was still alive. But Marlon's confession completely extinguished that hope. Police officers, along with Marlon, immediately went to the dump he had mentioned to search for Emily's body. When the patrol car stopped near the landfill, it was surrounded by an enraged crowd. People wanted to see the accused face to face and express their fury. Grief. Officers had to fire warning shots into the air to disperse the mob. The police decided it was too dangerous to let Marlon out of the vehicle. For more than 8 hours, they sifted through piles of trash and debris, but found nothing. The next morning, August 31, 2017, the residents of Senevi took to the streets in protest at around 9:00 a.m. They blocked the roads, burned tires, and threw stones, demanding that Marlon stop playing games with the Peguero family's emotions and reveal the truth about where he had hidden Emily's body. The situation became so violent that police had to intervene to restore order. Public anger continued to grow, and much of it was directed toward Marlon's mother. Many people saw her as the mastermind behind Emily's disappearance. Those who knew the Marlon family were convinced that Marlene was using her wealth and influence to protect her son. Later that day, the prayers of Emily's parents and the townspeople were finally answered. A body had been discovered in Espaillat province, about an hour's drive from Senevi. Emily's older brother received a flood of messages from friends and strangers alike, all saying that the body of an unidentified girl had been found nearby. The police, along with the Peguero family and relatives, rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. By the time they arrived, darkness had fallen. The only light came from police vehicles and flashlights. A crowd had gathered by the roadside. In the center lay a suitcase. Inside was the decomposing body of Emily Peguero, the 16-year-old who had been 5 months pregnant. The suitcase was opened. The body was carefully removed and transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy was carried out promptly. It revealed that Emily had died from internal bleeding, likely caused by a failed attempt to terminate her pregnancy. She had also suffered a severe blow to the head from a blunt object. According to the forensic report, death had been almost instantaneous. She probably never had time to understand what was happening to her. When the autopsy results were made public, outrage erupted across the Dominican Republic. By that time, Emily's story had gone viral. Her photos, smiling in a red traditional Dominican dress, flooded social media. The tragedy captured worldwide attention, with celebrities sharing Emily's image and urging justice for the young girl. Her family has launched a campaign demanding the case not be buried or forgotten. Communities united to pressure the authorities and ensure that justice would prevail. Emily was laid to rest in a white casket, surrounded by hundreds of mourners holding pink balloons. Many brought flowers and small gifts to honor her memory and to support the grieving Peguero family. Meanwhile, police investigations revealed that Marlon had lied from the very beginning. He had never taken Emily to the gas station, as he had told her mother and the reporters. The text message sent from Emily's phone that morning was fake, written by Marlon himself to cover up what he had done. Instead of taking her to the clinic, Marlon drove Emily to his mother's empty apartment. There, he allegedly forced her to drink an unknown liquid intended to end her pregnancy. The substance caused internal bleeding. Emily began to panic. She may have tried to resist or escape, but in the struggle, Marlon shoved her too hard. Emma fell, struck her head, died almost instantly. Panicked, Marlon placed Emily's body in a large bag, carried it out of the apartment, and loaded it into his car. Surveillance cameras captured him at that moment. He drove aimlessly for a while. Then, in desperation, threw the bag containing Emily's body from a bridge into a ravine. Afterward, he called his mother and confessed what he had done. Marlon was furious at him for handling the matter so carelessly. She promised to fix the situation and help make sure the body wouldn't be found. Later that same day, when the apartment building guard called and showed her the surveillance footage, she realized this evidence could destroy them both. From that point on, Marlon used all her influence to protect her son. Early on the morning of August 24th, Marlon met with her son and 2 accomplices to decide what to do with Emily's remains. Furious that Marlon had left the body in such an obvious place, she paid a man to help relocate it. The man went to the bridge, retrieved the bag, placed Emily's body into a suitcase, and dumped it on a roadside about an hour's drive from Sinovi, hoping that by the time it was discovered, no one would link it to Emily's disappearance. In the following days, police arrested 4 additional people connected to the Martinezes: Marlon's brother, one of her close friends, and 2 employees. However, all 4 cooperated with the investigation, were later released after giving testimony. None were directly involved in the murder itself. Ultimately, only Marlon and Marlon Martinez stood trial for the killing of Emily Peguero. The trial was as tense as it was emotional. During the 9 months that followed Emily's death, each court session brought new drama. Defense lawyers withdrew one after another. Outside the courthouse, local activists protested daily. Whenever Marlon appeared in court, she wore a bulletproof vest and helmet to protect her from the furious crowd that wanted vengeance. The tension was so high that, without that protection, the mob might have torn her apart on the spot. In court in April 2018, emotions inside the courtroom ran dangerously high. Emily Peguero's father, Genaro Peguero, was arrested after attempting to bring a firearm into the courthouse. His act was one of desperation. A heartbroken father who had lost faith in the system and could no longer bear the weight of his grief. When the prosecution decided to recreate the crime scene, they brought in the suitcase in which Emily's body had been found, along with her shoes and clothing, The odor of decay was so overpowering that the reenactment had to be conducted outdoors, in the courthouse parking lot. Under a scorching sun, prosecutors demonstrated how Emily's body had been folded and forced into the suitcase. For the Peguero family, watching this was almost unbearable. Already devastated, they were forced to relive the horror of how their daughter had been treated in death. Throughout the proceedings, the defense insisted that Marlon Martinez had never meant to kill Emily. But Marlon's story kept changing, each version contradicting the last. At first, he confessed to killing Emily and abandoning her body at the dump. Later, he claimed that Emily had taken a pill on her own, distraught over the pregnancy, and that her death was accidental. In a third version, he denied his mother's involvement altogether, claiming she didn't even know Emily was dead. These constant inconsistencies shattered his credibility completely. The Peguero family's attorney argued that when Marlon's attempt to induce an abortion failed, he panicked. Instead of taking Emily to the hospital and risking exposure, he decided it would be easier if she simply disappeared. He never expected her body to be found, nor the public to rise against him. The lawyer became a hero in the eyes of many Dominicans, boldly standing up to the powerful Martinez family and exposing their corruption. Of all the Peguero family, Adalgisa, Emily's older sister, suffered the deepest pain. She had once cared for Marlon and his siblings when they were children, feeding them, putting them to bed, and protecting them while their mother, Marlon, pursued her political career. For her, the betrayal was unthinkable. One of the very boys she had nurtured had grown up to take her baby sister's life. For the Peguero family, Emily's death was a devastating consequence of pride, class prejudice, and obsession with fame. The trial dragged on for months, every hearing more explosive than the last. In November 2018, a panel of 3 judges finally delivered their verdict. Marlon Martinez was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His mother, Marlon Martinez, was convicted of kidnapping and concealing a corpse, receiving a mere 5-year sentence. When the verdict was read, chaos erupted inside the courtroom. Angry shouts filled the air. People could not believe that a woman so deeply involved in Emily's disappearance would serve only 5 years behind bars. Protesters demanded that her sentence be increased to at least 20 years. But the court's ruling stood firm. Marlon's lawyer vowed to appeal, claiming he had never intended to kill Emily, that he had simply wanted to solve their problem, and things had gone terribly wrong. The Martinez family was also ordered to pay financial compensation to the Peguero family, though everyone knew no amount of money could ever make up for their loss. Then came another devastating blow. On May 15, 2019, the appeals court reduced Marlon's sentence to just 2 years, arguing there was insufficient proof that she had committed a crime. To the Peguero family and the Dominican public, it was an outrage. The injustice didn't end there. In September 2020, another ruling effectively ordered Marlon's immediate release. Many suspected her powerful political connections had influenced the decision. When she walked out of the correctional facility, a furious crowd waited outside, shouting insults and demanding retribution. But she didn't look back. Soon after, Marlon left the Dominican Republic and quietly resettled somewhere in the United States, far from the rage she had left behind. Meanwhile, her son Marlon remained behind bars, though even prison seemed to treat him gently. Rumors circulated that he had begun another relationship with a teenage girl and that guards occasionally allowed him to leave the facility unsupervised. Each new rumor was like another wound to the Peguero family's heart. For Emily's parents, nothing about the aftermath resembled justice. Their daughter, a bright 16-year-old who had dreamed of becoming a teacher, was gone. The people responsible for her death had managed to turn a story of brutality and loss into one more tale of power and privilege. Gennaro remembers how every morning before leaving for work, he would quietly step into his daughter's room, kiss her forehead, and whisper goodbye. It was a small ritual, something ordinary yet deeply precious. Now, That memory is what breaks him the most. In memory of his sister, Emily's brother wrote a 4-minute song recounting everything that happened to her. The love, the betrayal, and the unbearable loss. In the music video, the final scene shows him watching Marlon Martinez on television, pretending to cry at a press conference. Without saying a word, the brother stands up and smashes the TV screen. This action is a powerful symbol that reflects the anger and sadness felt by people across the country. Emily's bedroom remains exactly as she left it before her death. Red paper hearts are still taped to the headboard. Neon pink curtains flutter softly by the window. On her bedside table rest a few handmade bracelets, a small statue of Jesus, and a framed photo of the Pope. Inside her closet, her neatly folded clothes sit beside her collection of stuffed animals. The only new thing in the room is a collage of photos and farewell messages created by students from her school, a tribute to a young life stolen too soon. Across Latin America, femicide has reached devastating levels. Every year, around 200 women are murdered in the Dominican Republic alone, and that's only the official number. Many cases go unreported, buried in silence and fear. While police were searching for Emily's body, they discovered the remains of 2 other young women, both just 18. One was killed by her stepfather, the other by her boyfriend. Emily Peguero's death was only one among countless tragedies, but the brutality of her murder and the involvement of a politically connected family shook the entire nation. Her story represented resistance, grief, and the urgent need for justice in a society that frequently ignores such issues. By the summer of 2016, Annie Hester's life in Gresham, Oregon, seemed to have found peace after years of divorce. But one June night, that peace was torn apart. When police arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a scene so horrific that it stunned even seasoned investigators. The front door was wide open. The belongings hadn't been rummaged through, but on the floor were long streaks of blood leading to Annie's body, stabbed more than 60 times, with many wounds so deep they nearly severed her head. On her shoulder, the killer had carved the letters VXV, a strange sign that no one understood as a message, a symbol, or a challenge. The investigation quickly ruled out robbery or random attack. The crime scene revealed a carefully planned crime, driven by cold hatred and jealousy. What haunted the police most was the way the killer had broken in. Only someone who was too familiar with the apartment could have done so. So who killed Annie Hester? Why did a gentle, hard-working mother who devoted herself to her daughter have to die in such extreme pain? Annie Hester spent her entire life in Gresham, Oregon. Her childhood was difficult. When she was a teenager, her father died, and she relied on her mother and stepfather to get through. Despite the loss, Annie stayed close to her family and remained resilient. Friends and acquaintances describe Annie as trustworthy and determined. She is hardworking, has leadership qualities, and those qualities are reflected in every aspect of life. Her greatest joy, though, came from games. She loved role-playing adventures and cosplay festivals, and was a familiar face at local game shops. In the community of people with similar interests, Annie met Matthew Hester again. They had first met in 1999, when Matthew was married to someone else. Years passed, and they went their separate ways. Then, by chance, they met again at a local game store. This time, Matthew was divorced. From that meeting, they started dating and got married in 2008. In 2011, their daughter, Alice, was born. Annie was overjoyed, but the happiness didn't last. Just 1 year later, Matthew made the very mistake that had ruined his previous marriage: infidelity. Annie tried to forgive him, but the trust was gone. After more lies and broken promises, Annie made a hard choice. She filed for divorce and started over as a single mother. She and Alice moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. Annie gave Alice the bedroom and slept on a mattress in the living room. Annie worked tirelessly. During the day, she cared for children in an after-school program. At night, she worked at a downtown call center. Her dedication paid off, and she eventually became a manager. Still, the long hours took a toll, and Matthew's child support was inconsistent because he frequently changed jobs. Even so, she persevered to ensure that her daughter Alice had everything she needed, even when Matthew remarried. To a woman named Angela, Annie remained polite. The two families occasionally dined together or took Alice out. Annie has always been creative and appreciative of the little things. During Christmas, she made her own decorations and designed cards with Alice's face for her family. On weekends, when Alice was with her father, Annie took on extra work, often painting faces at local events. For her, staying busy was both a way to make a living and a way to express herself. She bore everything with a quiet strength. In the summer of 2016, that strength was tested by a terrible tragedy. One night, police were called to Annie's apartment in Gresham, Oregon. What they found shocked even experienced investigators. The intruder did not enter through the front door, but through Alice's bedroom window. The window air conditioner had been ripped out, and a block was used to push it open. When police arrived, the front door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was largely undisturbed. No ransacking, no missing items, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. Blood evidence revealed a brutal attack. Annie was likely asleep when her killer struck. She tried to flee toward the front door but didn't make it. She suffered more than 60 stab wounds, many to her chest and head. The assailant even attempted to decapitate her. On her shoulder, someone had carved 3 letters, VXV. No one knew what they meant. Message, symbol, or a taunt to mislead investigators. 3 knives were found on the carpet, some from Annie's kitchen, and 1 folding knife likely brought by the attacker. Bloody shoe prints led toward the exit. Detectives questioned whether there had been one attacker or more. Alice was safe. She had been staying with Matthew and Angela that night. Had she been home, she might also have been attacked. Neighbors reported disturbing sounds, screams and crashing around 11:15 p.m. Later, loud arguments, slamming doors, and groans that continued past 1 o'clock. AWS. One neighbor turned up the TV to drown out the noise. No one called for help. Only one person finally did. The victim herself, Annie. At 3 o'clock a.m. gasping for breath and barely able to speak, she managed to dial 911. It was a final act of desperation from a woman fighting for her life. From the first sounds neighbors reported around 11 o'clock p.m. to the moment Annie called for help, nearly 4 hours passed. Investigators found this deeply alarming. It implied the attack was not brief but prolonged, cruel, and essentially torture. They needed answers, but there were no suspects, no clear motive, and no explanation for the strange VXV symbol carved into Annie's body. The only thing certain, someone was determined to kill her. Police first focused on those closest to Annie. The police contacted Annie's ex-husband, Matthew Hester, and his current wife, Angela, to inform them of Annie's death and invite them to the station. Investigators needed to know about any tension, threats, or disputes. Matthew claimed that Annie had no enemies, that their relationship, though distant, was stable, and that his main concern was the safety of their daughter, Alice. He said he and Angela had been home all night with Alice and Angela's 3 children. They played video games and went to bed around 10 o'clock p.m. He claimed Angela was beside him the entire time, and she confirmed it. Angela added that she's a light sleeper and would have noticed if Matthew left during the night. However, detectives took note of Matthew's demeanor. He seemed largely unaffected by the violent death of his ex-wife, Annie. He focused on custody issues and Alice's future and described his feelings toward Annie as mostly indifferent, wanting minimal contact with her. Matthew admitted to having an affair during the marriage. but said they had an open arrangement. According to him, Annie also explored polyamory, including a relationship with a couple she met at a pirate-themed role-playing event. Investigators located the couple and cleared them of involvement. Matthew's physical condition also raised questions. He used a cane, walked with a limp, and had obvious health issues. Given the brutality of the crime, more than 60 stab wounds, detectives doubted whether he could have carried out the attack alone. Angela was questioned separately and repeated the story. The two of them went to bed at 10 o'clock, scrolled through their phones, and then fell asleep. The house was always noisy. 4 children, a dog, and a tenant in the garage. Angela's best friend, Karina, who was renting the garage, said she was sure Matthew and Angela were home all night. Karina said she would have heard if a car left the driveway. Both Matthew and Angela voluntarily surrendered their phones, and nothing incriminating was found at that time. With no solid evidence, they were released. Meanwhile, investigators expanded the search. Teams combed the brush along the Springwater Trail with dogs and helicopters. The area had a notorious reputation for crime and illicit substances, causing concern among residents. Many people assumed Annie might have met a dangerous vagrant. But the deeper we delve into Annie's life and her custody battle with Matthew, the less convincing this theory became. Co-parenting had deteriorated, particularly after Angela entered Matthew's life. Angela quickly went from rumor to lover, and tensions with Annie escalated. Angela reportedly didn't want Matthew communicating with Annie, and Matthew pushed for full custody of Alice. The dispute went to court. 1 month before Annie's murder, the court awarded full custody of Alice to Annie. Matthew was ordered to pay more than $13,000 in back child support and nearly $30,000 in legal fees. Neither Matthew nor Angela was employed. The financial pressure and the personal stakes were immense, and Annie had won. Detectives had a pressing question. How would Matthew and Angela pay? Matthew spent most of his time at home, writing fantasy fiction and designing elaborate role-playing games. He and Angela also ran a small YouTube channel sharing his fictional worlds. However, the reality was that they owed Annie thousands of dollars in child support and court fees. While having virtually no income, they explained that they were full-time caregivers for their children, claiming that their children had mental health issues that warranted government benefits and financial assistance. Angela's ex-husband, Aaron, told investigators that her fixation on diagnosing and medicating children had contributed to their divorce. According to Aaron, Angela often insisted her kids needed prescription drugs even when doctors disagreed. Behavior he viewed as dangerous and unnecessary. He also said Angela's attention later turned to Alice, Annie's daughter. Angela became convinced Alice was bipolar, a claim Annie vehemently denied. Annie feared Angela might try to use Alice's name and alleged condition to obtain additional benefits. Experts later validated Annie's concerns. A licensed psychologist explained that labeling normal developmental behaviors as mental illnesses was harmful, and there was no formal diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder in children under 6. Tensions escalated when Child Protective Services received a report that Annie was neglecting her daughter, Alice. She didn't know who made the call and was devastated. The case was quickly dismissed as unfounded, but the emotional impact was severe. In an email to a friend, she wrote painfully that she did not understand and asked why she had to endure all that. The motives were clear to investigators: child custody, jealousy, and money. 3 powerful reasons. Matthew and Angela could have wanted Annie gone, but motive alone wasn't enough. They still lacked hard evidence. The detectives brought Matthew and Angela back for more questioning. Matthew surprised them by taking off his shirt voluntarily, showing no cuts or scratches. Because Annie fought so hard for her life, detectives believe the killer may have been injured. Matthew insisted he had nothing to hide. He admits people may suspect him, but denies any involvement in Annie's death. Angela was mostly silent, bowing her head and complaining of fatigue. However, She gave new details that contradicted her previous testimony. She now said that around 3 o'clock a.m., on the night of the murder, she had been awake. She took the dogs outside and suddenly became violently ill. So ill that Matthew had to help her shower and change clothes. This new story put both of them awake and active at the same time. Annie called 911. With no solid evidence, the detectives had to release Matthew and Angela again. But this time, they began secret surveillance. What they found was troubling. Footage showed Matthew moving easily, carrying heavy shopping bags, doing yard work, and walking without a cane. His apparent frailty during interrogation seemed staged. Worse, a neighbor's security camera recorded a vehicle leaving Matthew and Angela's driveway shortly before 1 o'clock a.m. Heading toward Annie's apartment, their housemate, Karina, who slept in the garage, had told police she hadn't heard anything. Detectives now wondered if she was protecting them. Contradictions mounted. Matthew and Angela had lied, and their claims of innocence were falling apart. A year on, Annie's family is still waiting for answers. The brutality of her murder made silence unbearable. A reward was offered for information that could bring justice. Months later, the case remained unsolved. Annie's killer was still at large. The pain her family suffered was immeasurable. Her mother later said she would never want another parent to go through the same agony. The grief, the unanswered questions, and Annie's absence left wounds that would not heal. Public appeals followed. Police urged anyone with information to come forward, stressing that the perpetrator had to be found. For Annie's family, justice was the only path to peace. Meanwhile, Matthew and Angela quietly moved nearly 700 miles away, making it more difficult for them to cooperate in the investigation. But the detectives did not give up. Then came the turning point. DNA samples from the knives seized at the scene were tested. The results were undeniable. Blood and DNA matched Angela. In October 2017, more than a year after Annie's murder, police located Angela in Pocatello, Idaho. She was arrested on 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of first-degree theft. When arrested, Angela flew into a rage, screaming that she had young children at home and demanding answers. Detectives stood firm. She was charged with intentionally killing Annie, and prosecutors added an additional charge, alleging torture. If convicted, Angela faced life in prison, and at that time, possibly the death penalty. She pleaded not guilty, insisting she was innocent despite mounting evidence. Detectives then turned to Matthew. They showed him Annie's autopsy photos, hoping to break his ice. At first, Matthew denied any involvement. He later admitted Angela came home the night of the murder covered in blood. He claimed she was panicking, and that he only helped her clean up. He said he didn't know what she had done, though he also acknowledged that he and Angela had previously discussed killing Annie. Matthew then tried to shift blame to Angela's ex-husband, Aaron. Detectives thoroughly questioned Aaron but found no evidence linking him to the crime. He was never charged. Court records reveal the chilling details of the charges against Angela: stabbing Annie more than 60 times, attempting to decapitate her, and carving VXV into her skin. It was a crime defined by rage and cruelty. The strongest incriminating evidence came from her Google Maps search history. 3 days after the murder, Angela looked up a spot in Mount Hood National Forest. Detectives went there and found a boot buried near a tree. It matched a bloody shoe print at the scene. A diver later recovered a plastic bag nearby containing Angela's clothing. The fabric pattern, size, and purchase history directly linked her. The evidence was overwhelming. As investigators dug deeper, they found another disturbing detail. Annie had a $100,000 life insurance policy, naming her parents as beneficiaries. Shortly after her death, someone called the insurance company, not her parents, but Matthew, asking if he could receive the payout. When told no information could be provided, he hung up. By 2019, prosecutors expanded the case. Matthew was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. 1 count of solicitation to commit murder, and 1 count of hindering prosecution. He pleaded not guilty. Like Angela. But the evidence grew. In 2020, Angela changed her plea and admitted to second-degree murder. Oregon law had changed by then, eliminating the possibility of the death penalty. But she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Matthew's case concluded later. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to soliciting Angela's brother to commit murder and to hindering prosecution. His sentence was considered light, given the severity of the case. Just 56 months. Less than 5 years. Many criticized the outcome, but prosecutors called it strategic. If stronger evidence later emerged against Matthew, they could still prosecute him for conspiracy to commit murder. If he was acquitted, that would not be possible. Angela and Matthew divorced while incarcerated. Angela has not spoken publicly about Annie since her arrest. Angela's child was placed in foster care, and Alice was adopted by Annie's mother. Alice finally found the safety and love in the family Annie had always wanted for her. Those who had worked with Annie remembered her not only as a victim, she was an inspiration, a tireless worker who shouldered many hardships, yet still brought joy to others. Her positivity, even in her darkest moments, left a lasting mark. In her final moments, Annie reflected what she always embodied: strength, resilience, and a fierce will to fight. The luxurious villa in the mountains of La Calera, outside Bogotá, was the place where Mauricio Leal returned after a stressful day at work. But on the morning of November 22, 2021, that once bright space suddenly became the scene of a gruesome crime. Mauricio, a hairstylist, revered by Colombia's art world, lay motionless on his bed, a dagger still lodged in his stomach. Beside him, his biological mother, Marlene Hernandez, was also dead, her body carefully covered with a blanket as if someone was trying to hide something. On the bedside table was a suicide note, signed Mauricio, but just looking closely, the police felt a chill. The handwriting was shaky. The ink was unusually thick. Each stroke seemed drawn from fear. The investigation began in that room, and then revealed a dark and unbelievable secret. The killer was not a stranger, but someone Mauricio had trusted with all his heart. Mauricio Leal was born on November 25, 1974, in Cartago, Valle del Cauca, Colombia. However, his childhood was mainly tied to the coffee-growing region in central Colombia, where he lived with his mother, Ms. Marlene Hernandez. From a young age, Mauricio was passionate about hairdressing, fascinated by how a hairstyle could change a person's mood. Noticing his interest, Marlene enrolled in a hairstyling course and let Mauricio accompany her. Although he couldn't enter the classroom, he watched attentively from the window. At the age of 15, his father left the family, forcing them to move to Cali. To help his mother, he woke up at 3:30 a.m. to sell arepas to working people. After school, he continued packing, sleeping only about 4 hours a night. His passion for hairstyling continued to grow. A woman from church helped him get a job at a friend's salon. He started as an assistant, washing hair, serving drinks, and cleaning, while closely observing the stylists. After a month, he asked for a chance to work as a hairstylist. Though hesitant, his boss let him demonstrate his skills. Worried but determined, he made a strong impression and was given his dream position. Even without formal training, his talent stood out. He quickly became the salon's famous hairstylist, attracting many customers and getting a raise. Over time, Mauricio built up a loyal clientele, many of whom promised to follow him if he opened his own salon. This made some colleagues jealous and created tension in the family when his older brother, Jonier, felt overshadowed by their mother's pride in Mauricio. Undeterred, at 22, Mauricio opened Mauricio Leal Peluqueria. The quality of his service brought him quick success. He had to hire more staff, including Jonier. Although hairstyling wasn't Jonier's passion, he worked efficiently and was eager to make money. To grow the business, Mauricio moved to northern Bogotá and opened a spa salon. His reputation attracted high-profile clients, beauty queens, actrices, and singers. His work appeared in magazines, TV shows, fashion weeks, and films. Despite his rising fame, he remained kind and charismatic, earning the nickname Mao. In 2016, Mauricio set his sights on international expansion. He partnered with a loyal client to create the company Incomer S.A. and opened a branch in Miami, USA. He did not know that the woman was the daughter-in-law of a human trafficker, leading to his inclusion on the Clinton list, a list of entities involved in illegal activities, implemented by the U.S. Treasury Department since 1995. The result? The account was frozen. He had to spend most of his assets on lawyers to solve the problem. He handed over the company to his mother, making Jonier even more dissatisfied. Eventually, Mauricio returned to hairstyling in Bogotá, regained his clients' trust, and rebuilt his finances. He bought a luxury apartment in La Calera and lived there with his mother, Marlene, strengthening their relationship. Mauricio's brother, Jonier, tried to open his own shop, but struggled and had to close. By 2021, Mauricio, at 37, had earned international recognition. Meanwhile, Jonier faced legal issues and asked to stay with him for a while. True to his generous nature, Mauricio agreed. It was at this high point in his career that tragedy struck on November 22, 2021, a pivotal day for Mauricio. He was scheduled to sign a contract to become an advisor for the Miss Universe Colombia pageant, a major step in his career. But at 6:19 a.m., he texted his driver, Jair Ruiz, that he wanted to sleep in for a few more hours and told Jair to go straight to the salon. This was unusual, as Mauricio was known to wake up early, especially on busy workdays. As the hours passed, his absence became alarming. He missed the pageant commitment and never arrived at the salon. Karen, his assistant and right hand at the salon, tried calling him without success. Jair also attempted to find him in La Calera, but couldn't reach him. By 11 o'clock Jair had contacted Jonier. They arranged to meet at 2:00 p.m. at Mauricio's house. As Jonier had the key, when they arrived, there was no sign of Mauricio or their mother, Marlene. Mauricio's bedroom door was locked from the inside. After knocking repeatedly and getting no response, Jonier suggested Jair enter through the window. Inside, Jair discovered a horrifying scene. Mauricio and Marlene were dead on the bed. Marlene was neatly covered with a blanket. Mauricio had a knife embedded in his abdomen, held loosely in his hands, and there was a large pool of blood. Jair also noticed on the nightstand a cell phone, a box of sleeping pills, a wine glass, a large glass, and a letter. Jair and Jonier immediately called the police, and they arrived at 4:00 p.m. Police quickly observed stab wounds on both bodies. They recovered 2 knives at the scene, seemingly used in the killings. The body was sent for forensic examination. Meanwhile, investigators focused on a letter believed to have been written by Mauricio. The content resembled a suicide note, expressing love, asking for forgiveness, saying he could no longer live, and leaving everything to his nephews and brothers. The letter ended with 1124. The final number was the access code for Mauricio's and Marlene's phones and bank accounts. At first, the incident appeared to be Mauricio harming himself, but it's necessary to verify whether the letter was indeed written by him. A handwriting analysis confirmed it was his, but with anomalies, weak, uneven strokes and inconsistent pressure, with some parts faint and others darker. This suggested Mauricio might have been forced to write it. shifting the investigation toward identifying the killer. The first interview was with Jair. He said he felt pressured by Jair to enter through the window. He also claimed he tried to resuscitate Mauricio, but Jair told him not to, arguing it would contaminate the scene. Jair also highlighted the unusual text message from the morning. Mauricio's sleeping in was strange, and the style of the text message was similar to the note left at the scene. Meanwhile, Jair appeared calm when questioned. He said he had taken sleeping pills and heard nothing during the night. He mentioned leaving the house in the morning but did not specify where he went. On November 24, the autopsy results arrived and undermined Jair's account. They showed that Marlene was stabbed 4 times while she slept, giving her no chance to react. Mauricio's body had multiple defensive wounds on his arms and nose, indicating he fought back. He was stabbed 4 times in the abdomen, resulting in death. The possibility of self-harm is ruled out because a single fatal stab would have been enough to cause rapid death. The presence of multiple wounds indicates there was an assailant. The evidence suggested the assailant first stabbed Mauricio in the torso, arms, and even the nose to subdue him. When the knife got stuck in Mauricio's body, the killer went to the kitchen for another knife and hid the handle of the first under a pillow. The attacker then forced Mauricio to write the note before delivering the fatal stab wounds. It is highly unlikely that Mauricio, with a knife stuck in his body, would have gone to the kitchen for another knife. Additionally, Mauricio was right-handed. While the wounds appear to have been inflicted by a left-handed person, the toxicology report showed that both Mauricio and Marlene each ingested 9 sleeping pills before they died. The forensic timeline determined that they died between midnight on November 21 and early morning on November 22. Thus, Jair was at home at the exact time of the murder, and the text message sent from Mauricio's phone to Jair at 6 o'clock am. On November 22 was not written by Mauricio. With this evidence, authorities concluded that Mauricio and Marlene were murdered. The case quickly caused a media stir. The artistic world mourned Mauricio, the famous stylist, while the public also discussed those who were jealous of Mauricio. Investigators looked into his past, looking for potential feuds, suspected human trafficking, and the possibility of providing information to get removed from the Clinton list, rivals in the hairdressing industry who might want to compete for clients. However, the facts remained. The weapon came from the kitchen, and there were no signs of forced entry. Investigators then focused on Mauricio's inner circle and noticed increasingly odd behavior from Jair. He repeatedly appeared on television wearing Mauricio's jacket, claiming that Jair would be his driver and would take over Mauricio's hair salons. He repeatedly insisted that Mauricio killed Marlene and then himself, a theory already dismissed by the police. Searches of Mauricio's home between December 2021 and January 2022 produced key findings. Security footage showed Mauricio entering at 9:59 p.m. on Saturday, November 20, followed by Jair at 10:52 p.m. On Sunday, Jair left around noon to buy food, returned at 2 o'clock p.m., and then left 4 hours later for a family party. At the party, he received a voice note from Mauricio asking for cookies. Verified through his phone, he returned home at 11:37 p.m. That night, the autopsy set the time of the murders between 11:45 p.m. on Sunday and 5:53 a.m. Monday, at 11:19 am. On Monday, Jair left the house and contacted Jair, falsely saying he wasn't home. Given the complex's strict security and surveillance, this placed Jair as the only person in the house during the murders and exposed lies in his initial police statement. More evidence emerged during the searches. 1 drop of blood on the stairs and 1 on the towel in Jair's bathroom both belonged to Marlene and someone who is related to her by blood. Additional blood was found in the drain of Mauricio's bathroom, though it could not be identified. Cleaning supplies and a mop were discovered in Mauricio's bathroom, and an employee confirmed these items had been moved from the designated cleaning area. Mauricio's side of the bed was soaked in blood. while there was none where Marlene's body was found. Her sheets had been freshly changed. These traces suggest that Marlene did not die in her bedroom. She was moved from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor, where Maurizio was murdered. Investigators concluded that Jonier committed the double murder and cleaned up the crime scene to stage it. Using items found in Mauricio's bathroom, they also noted a cut on Jonier's hand. He said it was from work scissors, but it was consistent with the knife used in the murders. Investigators uncovered significant debts in his name, some of which were paid off shortly after Mauricio's death. When large sums were withdrawn from Mauricio's accounts, Jonier said he slept on the night of November 21, but network data on his phone showed that he was online until the early morning of November 22, coinciding with the time of the crime, and the phone was not in use during the time of the murder. With this information, the agents questioned Jair, who said that in the days after the murders, Jonier acted suspiciously. He asked his lawyer about the inheritance and worried about the forensic findings. It became clear that Jonier committed the murders to claim Mauricio's inheritance. On January 14, 2022, the prosecutor's office authorized his arrest and charged him with aggravated double homicide, concealment, and evidence tampering. He surrendered without resistance. After consulting his lawyer, Jonier initially accepted a plea deal for a reduced sentence and, on March 29, publicly pled guilty and apologized to the country and his family. However, in April, his lawyer announced he would not accept the deal. As the trial dragged on, investigators reconstructed the night of the murders. 4 months earlier, Jonier had moved in with Marlene and Mauricio, citing marital problems. This gave him time to learn the layout of the house and the items he later used in the crime. On the night of November 21, 2021, he gave both Mauricio and Marlene 9 sedative pills and waited for them to take effect. In the early morning, he attacked Marlene with a knife while she slept in her 3rd floor bedroom. Jonier then went to Mauricio's room and attacked him with the same knife. When the blade got stuck in Mauricio's body, he went to the kitchen, grabbed another knife, and inflicted multiple wounds to intimidate him. While Mauricio was defenseless, Jonier forced him to write a note leaving all his inheritance to him, then delivered the fatal stab wounds. He then staged the crime scene. He moved Marlene's body from her room to Mauricio's, leaving a bloodstain on the first step of the staircase. He changed Marlene's bedsheets and used various cleaning products to remove blood traces, but missed the stain on the stairs. In May 2023, the prosecution requested a 60-year sentence, but Jonier maintained his innocence, further delaying the trial. On September 21 of the same year, a new testimony emerged from a longtime friend of Marlene, who had previously remained silent due to threats. She said that she and her son had been kidnapped by a hooded man who threatened to kill them if they revealed the truth. Facing a serious illness, she decided to go to court and testify under oath. She accused Carlos Andrés García, Jonier's half-brother, who was imprisoned in Jamundi, Valle del Cauca, for assaulting a 14-year-old girl. She said Carlos frequently called her, pressuring her to persuade Marlene to help get him out of jail and expressing anger at Marlene and Mauricio for not assisting him. Before her death, Marlene told this friend that Carlos was extorting her for 100 million pesos to pay his lawyers and threatened to have Mauricio imprisoned if she refused. Carlos then called this friend and said he was considering killing Marlene and Mauricio out of frustration. After learning of these statements, Carlos sued the witness for false testimony, defamation, and slander, claiming the allegations were baseless and damaging. That case remains unresolved. On January 12, 2024, at the request of Jonier's lawyer, a new hearing was held. The defense argued that Jonier had been in pretrial detention for 725 days without resolution, and that no procedural measures or extensions had been requested during that time. The judge denied the request for release, citing procedural delays. The trial finally began in February 2024. Jonier was charged with aggravated murder due to kinship, defenselessness, and cruelty. as well as evidence tampering. He denied the charges, insisting he would never harm Marlene or Mauricio. The prosecutor argued that he altered the crime scene while wearing gloves and tampered with evidence, noting that security footage showed he was the only person in the house during the murders. A drop of Marlene's blood on the staircase ultimately implicated him. On February 26, 2024, the court found Jonier Leal guilty, stating that he intended to take over Mauricio's financial role. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murders of Mauricio and Marlene. He said the sentence was equivalent to the death penalty due to his age, and he maintained his innocence and said he would appeal. Despite strong evidence, he has not disclosed what happened on the night of November 21, 2021. Driven by greed, he committed terrible crimes against his own family and is now facing the consequences. It was August 21, 2017. A calm, sunlit morning in a quiet suburb of Detroit, Michigan. Two teenagers found their mother, Nada Huranye, dead in their backyard. She lay on her back, looking as if she had accidentally fallen out of the window. But within minutes, that illusion began to crumble. Something about the scene didn't fit. Investigators began noticing details that didn't align with an accidental fall. Phone records, camera footage, and physical evidence all show that things were not as they appeared. Who would want to harm a mother of three? How had a seemingly well-off, successful family suddenly become the center of a murder investigation? That morning, the Farmington Hills Police Department received an emergency call from 14-year-old Aya Altantawi, reporting that her mother was missing. She told dispatchers she couldn't find her anywhere in the house. After searching, she eventually looked outside and saw her mother lying on the stone patio below a second-floor window. Aya, panicked, called her brother, Muhammad, 16, who immediately started performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation, trying to save their mother. When the first officer arrived at the scene, Aya led him to where her mother lay. While Muhammad was still attempting to revive her, the officer quickly took over and continued CPR until paramedics arrived. But it was too late. There was no pulse. Nada Huranye was pronounced dead at the scene. Her body was later transported to the Oakland County Medical Examiner's office. Though the cause of death was still unclear at that time, Muhammad and Aya told police that their 12-year-old sister had also been at home that morning, but she was asleep and hadn't heard a thing. Both siblings said no one had entered the house during the night or early morning hours. Aya explained that her mother usually drove her to school, but that morning felt unusually quiet. She had to go to school at 6:40 a.m., but she realized her mother had disappeared. Repeated calls to her mother's phone went unanswered. Every attempt went straight to voicemail. Growing worried, Aya began searching the house more thoroughly. When she reached the second floor, she noticed something strange in the guest bedroom, which the family called the makeup room. The window was open. A small stepladder was placed nearby, and beside it were a bucket of water and a bottle of glass cleaner. Her mother was nowhere in sight. When Aya leaned toward the window, looked down, she froze. There, on the cold stone patio, was her mother's body. Panicked, Aya screamed for her brother. Together, they called 911 and waited for help to arrive. When questioned about the last time they saw their mother, Aya recalled that it had been around 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. the previous evening. Muhammad added that early that morning, he had heard their mother moving around upstairs, and then everything went silent. Their father, Bassel Altantawi, was living separately at the time, as he and Nada were in the middle of a divorce. When the police asked the children to contact him, he rushed to the house. Upon hearing that his wife was dead, Bassel collapsed to his knees in shock and grief. Unable to comprehend what had just happened, while the family was still struggling to process what had happened, investigators began carefully examining the house and the yard. Nada was found lying on her back, an unusual position for someone who had fallen from a window. Even more troubling was the absence of blood around her body. A fall from such a height should have caused obvious injury, but in reality nothing happened. Inside the room from which she had supposedly fallen, detectives noticed more inconsistencies. The bucket of water stood perfectly upright against the wall. Not a single drop spilled. The stepladder was still in place, and a bottle of cleaning solution sat neatly on the top step. On the windowsill, investigators found a small piece of adhesive tape whose purpose was unclear. Stranger still, the outside surface of the window was streaked with dried tile cleaner, a substance never used for washing glass. In the courtyard beside the body, officers found a towel soaked in a strong chemical odor. It was carefully collected as evidence. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the home, and nothing suggested that anyone from outside had entered during the night. As detectives continued their search, they noticed several security cameras mounted outside the house. One of them faced the side yard, the same area where Nada's body was found. Although the guest bedroom window wasn't directly visible, the light coming from that window projected shadows on the opposite wall. Those shadows would soon reveal something chilling. Footage recorded at 5:53 a.m. showed the bedroom light switch on. A silhouette appeared at the window. Moments later, the window opened, and the figure seemed to lift something heavy from the floor, then push it outward. After that, the shadow lingered, motionless for a few seconds, as if looking down, before moving away from the window. For investigators, these images leave no doubt that this was no accident. What they were seeing was murder. When the autopsy results came back, their suspicions were confirmed. The cause of death was strangulation, and the fall had been staged to disguise the crime. By the time Nada's body hit the ground, she had already been dead. Nada Hurania was well known in the community. A 35-year-old mother of three, a personal trainer, and a woman whose energy filled every room she entered. Neighbors often saw her jogging in the mornings. Her client described her as upbeat, compassionate, and deeply committed to helping others. She was devoted to her children. Her daughter Aya would later recall that her mother always made sure they woke up for school, ate well, and stayed active. Their home, Aya said, ran on discipline, but also on laughter. Yet behind that warmth, there were struggles. Nada was in the midst of a bitter divorce from her husband, Dr. Basel Alantavi. After nearly 20 years of marriage, they had wed in Syria in 1999 and later built a life in Michigan. But years of tension had taken their toll. Nada wanted independence to start fresh and live on her own terms. 2 days before her death, she was due in court for another hearing in the divorce proceedings. Her decision to leave stemmed from an incident on Valentine's Day 2016, when she claimed Basel had pushed her down a flight of stairs. He denied it, but later pleaded guilty to domestic violence. The court sentenced him to probation, required him to wear an ankle monitor, and ordered him to stay away from his wife for 2 years. At the same time, Basel's once promising medical career was falling apart. In 2016, he was charged with Medicaid fraud for submitting false billing claims as an internist. He eventually paid nearly $280,000 in restitution and fines. He also had his medical license revoked. In divorce filings, he argued that he could no longer afford alimony and accused Nada of maintaining an extravagant lifestyle. Given that history, investigators quickly turned their attention toward Basel, but the evidence didn't fit. Surveillance cameras showed no one entering or leaving the house that night, and his ankle monitor confirmed he had been miles away until police summoned him to the scene. Inside the house were only Nada and her 3 children. It soon became clear that the killer had been much closer than anyone wanted to believe. Trying to figure out what really happened, investigators once again turned to the home's security camera footage. One of the cameras captured Aya running back and forth between the yard and the driveway, first leading the way for police, then paramedics. The footage also showed Muhammad leaning over his mother, but according to investigators, his movements appeared strange, as if he were only pretending to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation. His hands barely touched Nada's chest. When police later compared the video footage with the 911 call timeline, they discovered that during the call, Mohammed paused several times, even though his voice on the recording made it sound as if he were still counting and actively trying to save his mother's life. In reality, he sat beside her body for long stretches, doing nothing. To investigators, it looked like a performance meant for the operator, as though he wanted to create the illusion that he was desperately fighting to save his mom. When Aya arrived with the police officer, Mohammed started pressing on his mother's chest again. This time more forcefully, the officer noted that when he first saw the boy, Mohammed had been holding his phone in his right hand and lightly tapping his mother's chest with his left. Again, as if he were pretending to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After learning all this, investigators decided to dig deeper. The first search of the house on August 21st had been only a cursory inspection, but later the police returned with a full search warrant. Inside the washing machine, they found several items, including a brown bath mat. The machine showed an error code, and through the glass door, investigators noticed white residue floating in the water, likely remnants of the mat's rubber backing. In the dryer, they discovered a pair of jeans and a t-shirt belonging to Mohammed. These items, along with the towel found near Nada's body and other materials collected from around the house, were sent for forensic testing. Investigators suspected that one or more of these items might have been used in the murder, possibly soaked with a toxic chemical. The home contained many potential sources of poison. In the garage, police collected several containers: antifreeze, bleach, weed killer, and rat poison, all of which were seized for laboratory analysis. After reviewing the surveillance footage, detectives returned to the house and requested that all family members participate in formal interviews. Basil, the children's father, declined to be present. He left the investigators at the home and went to pick up Aya, who was at school at the time. However, he did allow detectives to speak with Mohammed alone. During the interview, investigators asked Mohammed a series of basic questions about his mother's routine. He told them that she usually went to bed around 9:30 a.m. or 10 o'clock p.m., though sometimes earlier, around 9. When asked what time she had gone to bed the previous night, he said it had been unusually early, around 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. When investigators pressed further, asking if he knew why she had gone to bed so much earlier than usual, he replied that he didn't know, adding that they hadn't talked much the previous day. When asked about his relationship with his mother, he described things as normal, saying they still get along. He mentioned that the only period of tension between them had been at the beginning of his parents' divorce case, which had started about 1.5 to 2 years earlier. As the questioning continued, investigators guided him to recount how that morning unfolded. Mohammed said he had not gotten up during the night, heard any noises, or left his room. He told them that he went to sleep around 11:30 a.m., woke up sometime between 6 and 6:30 a.m., and went into the bathroom to take a shower and get ready for school. He said he then heard his sister scream from the makeup room, and when he ran to her, she was already on the phone. According to him, she told him they needed to go outside to wait for help. As the detectives started discussing details, they told Mohammed that the house's security cameras were working. He seemed surprised and said he didn't know there were cameras at the back of the house. The detectives mentioned that a recording showed another person near the window where his mother fell. When investigators asked whether his sister had witnessed the fall, he explained that she was the one who had discovered the scene. However, when pressed further, he hesitated and said he wasn't sure if she had been there when it happened. Detectives learned that someone was in the room when Nada fell. The video footage clearly showed a shadow by the window, and it wasn't a young girl's silhouette. The figure was stockier, with short hair and a masculine build. It matched Mohammed's appearance almost perfectly. As questioning continued, Mohammed's account began to shift. At first, he insisted that he hadn't been in the room when the fall occurred. But later, he admitted that he had, in fact, been helping his mother. He said that she had been cleaning the window that morning and had asked him to bring her a spray bottle. According to his version of events, he handed it to her while she stood on a stepladder. Removing the window screen, Nada had told him to stay and hold the ladder because it was shaking. Mohammed did as she asked, holding the ladder with one hand while she leaned forward to spray. Wipe the glass. Then, something went wrong. She leaned too far. Her foot slipped, and something seemed to get stuck. In a moment of confusion, she lost her balance and fell out the window. Mohammed told the detectives that after seeing Nada fall, he froze. He didn't know what to do. In shock, he went to the bathroom, took a shower, and tried to convince himself that he was dreaming. He just wanted something to change, anything to erase what he had just seen. Around 40 minutes into the interview, the session was abruptly interrupted when Basil Al-Tantawi returned to the house. He immediately demanded that the questioning stop and insisted his son should not answer another word without an attorney present. Detectives complied, but by then they already had enough inconsistencies and enough unease to dig deeper. When they obtained Mohammed's phone records, one particular number immediately drew attention. On the day of his mother's death, he had called it more than 50 times, beginning at 4:27 am and continuing until late that evening. In his contacts, the number appeared under a single word: love. 8 of those calls were made before 5 a.m. About an hour before the camera captured the moment Nada fell from the window, investigators compared that activity to his previous call logs and found nothing remotely similar. There was no other day when the boy had tried to reach anyone so frantically. Most calls lasted only a few seconds. Many went unanswered. But one stood out: an incoming call at 5:55 a.m. The precise minute when the footage showed his mother's body falling from the guest room window. Detectives soon obtained a warrant to seize Mohammed's iPhone. What they discovered transformed the investigation. The mysterious contact labeled love was none other than his father, Basil. For months, father and son had been exchanging a steady stream of texts, photos, and voice recordings. Among the files were secret recordings of Nada's private conversations, including discussions with her divorce attorney. The tone of those messages disturbed investigators deeply. Mohammed had saved his father's number as Love, while his mother's name in his phone appeared as Dog. The contrast speaks volumes. In one screenshot dated about a month before her death, Nada had sent a message to her son, saying she knew about her husband's illegal activities, information serious enough to send him to prison. She added that she had stayed silent out of fear that her husband might turn that same information against her. Within minutes, Mohammed had forwarded the message to his father. Detectives believe Mohammed had begun to see his mother as a threat, not just to his father, but to the family's honor and stability. Roughly 3 weeks later, another image was sent from Mohammed's phone to his father. A photograph of the second-floor window, the same one from which Nada would later fall. According to investigators, the image looked like a rehearsal, suggesting someone was figuring out how to remove the window screen. Digital forensics uncovered even more chilling evidence. At 8:10 am, on the morning of the tragedy, while paramedics and officers were still inside the home, someone had attempted to delete data from the family computer. Records showed that Mohammed was the one who tried to erase files connected to his recent online activity. Days later, police arrested Mohammed and charged him with the murder of his mother. Although investigators believed that Basil might have influenced Mohammed, there was insufficient evidence to charge him directly. The official theory was that Mohammed, acting alone, had killed his mother sometime before dawn. Those who knew the family were not surprised when the charges were announced. Many described Mohammed as being very much like his father: disciplined, conservative, and deeply traditional. Mohammed had grown increasingly critical of his mother's new independence. He resented her job as a personal trainer, disapproved of her decision to divorce, and believed she had abandoned the family's Syrian and Islamic values. His sister, by contrast, had adapted easily to life in America, helping their mother at home going shopping, and enjoying sports. Friends and relatives later told detectives that tension between mother and son had been building for months. One relative recounted a heated argument that occurred just a week before the tragedy, during which Mohammed had angrily declared that his mother would get what she deserves. Investigators concluded that Neda had been suffocated with a cloth soaked in a toxic substance, possibly one of the household chemicals found in the garage. The exact compound was never identified. The court proceedings stretched on for years, delayed first by appeals and then by the global health issues. When the case finally went to trial, prosecutors presented a deliberate chain of events. They believed that the attack had taken place inside the bathroom of the guest bedroom, the same room from which Neda's body was later thrown. According to their theory, Mohammed had killed his mother to prevent her from testifying against his father in an upcoming divorce hearing, a testimony that could have ruined Basil's remaining reputation and financial standing. In the courtroom, jurors watched the same surveillance footage that had disturbed investigators years earlier. The prosecution pointed out how, during the emergency call, Mohammed appeared to pause cardiopulmonary resuscitation even as his voice continued counting steadily on the phone, as if he were performing for the dispatcher rather than fighting to save his mother's life. The footage showing the shadow in the window was also presented. Prosecutors emphasized the shapeless lead-at, posture, and timing, arguing that the figure seen by the glass could only have been Mohammed. One of his sisters took the stand and spoke about the tension that had long simmered inside the family home. She told the court that her brother had strongly opposed the divorce, believing their mother was trying to take away their father's money and destroy their family. She said, to him, the divorce wasn't just a legal separation. It was an act of betrayal. The defense countered with an entirely different narrative. They claimed that investigators had rushed to judgment and failed to explore other potential suspects. One name in particular stood out, a male friend and co-worker from the fitness center where Neda worked. According to the defense, this man had visited the family's home before, and on one occasion had even entered without the children's knowledge. Attorneys argued that police had dismissed this lead too quickly. The defense also focused on procedural flaws during the investigation. They reminded the court that Mohammed was only 16 at the time of the interrogation, and that he had confessed before being informed of his rights. By law, minors cannot be questioned without being advised of their right to remain silent or without legal counsel present. The defense argued the confession was unreliable, the result of pressure, fear, and confusion. Despite these arguments, the trial concluded swiftly. After just over a week of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for barely 2 hours before delivering their verdict. Guilty. Mohammed al-Tantawi was sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison for the murder of his mother. His father, Basil al-Tantawi, escaped prosecution. There was never enough evidence to link him directly to the crime. But within the family, guilt was viewed differently. One of Mohammed's sisters later said that, in her eyes, both her brother and her father shared responsibility for their mother's death. After the trial, she ended all communication with them, deciding to separate herself from the two men who had been so important to her